Good evening. If you found your way here tonight, maybe your day's been long. Maybe your mind is still racing a little. Or maybe you just need a voice in the quiet. So, breathe. Let the world slow down, just for a while. Tonight, I'll take you deep into a forest where time doesn't move the way it should. Where someone who wanted to disappear found something that had been waiting. This isn't a story to scare you. Not really. It's a soft tale of silence, of memory, of the kind of hunger that lives under roots and breathes with the trees. So, curl up. Let your eyes grow heavy. And if the woods call to you in your dreams tonight, just remember, not everything that's quiet is safe. Written below is the last known statement of Benjamin Harper, a former parish priest serving the village of Barton, Cheshire. Mr. Harper was relieved of his position by Bishop Gerald Ellison of the Chester Diocese and taken here to Byron House, a home for the mentally disturbed, shortly after suffering an acute episode of hysterical anxiety. There, he came under the direct care of one Dr. George Monroe, the head psychiatrist. Mr. Harper's growing insanity is believed to have been triggered by his inability to accept the loss of his close friend and predecessor, Stephen Adams. Following the death of his mentor, Mr. Harper suffered a rapid decline in both his sanity and his faith that ultimately led to his confinement. Mr. Harper's stay in Byron House was, however, brief, as he vanished from his cell, Dr. Howard Fleming, before making good his escape. The weeks prior to his flight marked some of the most drastic alterations in his demeanor. The house staff would often report that Mr. Harper's mood would shift dramatically and without provocation, particularly during the nighttime hours. Some of the orderlies even refused to work with him, citing a disturbing smirk that would creep across his face, most often as a precursor to his fluctuating moods. In the months that have passed since his disappearance, I have been able to directly confirm several of the less outlandish claims made in his statement. Some of the events described within, however, are simply too fantastical for me to officially stake my reputation on acknowledging. Others are woefully and worryingly repugnant in their authenticity. There is little doubt that Barton is a strange place. Stranger still is the unsettling grip that it has upon some of the village's residents. There is a tangible miasma of superstition and fear that lurks over the village like a blanket of fog. Outsiders may very well scoff at those who put stock in old tales of witches and werewolves. But to many residents of the village, there is little distinction between reality and folklore. I cannot deny that I, despite being a man of science, find the strange history of Barton seductive and even nourishing, as it is for all those who harbor a secret and inescapable appetite for the weird. One need only walk down certain decaying streets in the south end of the village and take note of the odd symbols and signs that the common folk keep over their doors, to see that a great many in Barton refuse to let the old ways die. During my time at Byron House, I too have seen things that I cannot fully comprehend or provide reason for. I have treated many longtime Barton residents who firmly believe, with a level of conviction not seen in many conventional religions, that the devil makes his grotto in the shadowed woods that crown the edges of the village. I have decided to share Mr. Harper's account of his growing madness in his own words, in the hopes that many in the scientific community will be able to gain an insight into how and why such episodes of insanity come to fruition and how they can be successfully treated. It is also my hope that should any of the stranger occurrences written below ring true for you, the reader, then this statement will also serve as a dire warning and lesson in meddling within the affairs of certain circles, who clearly do not take kindly to outside interference. These, then, are the last known words of Benjamin Harper. I don't understand. What more do you want me to say? I have told my story to the police, to the doctors here, and to anyone else who will listen. You have no right to keep me locked up in this place. I have committed no crime and caused no harm to anyone. I would still have my freedom and the village its safety had it not been for a lone passerby spotting me in the darkness of the cemetery on that awful night and alerting the police. This whole affair would have been covered up and be done with, and you would have remained blissfully ignorant to my involvement in the matter had those blundering bobbies not interfered. You say I am mad. You may well be right. But if you had come to the same conclusions as I did regarding the fate of my poor friend, I am sure you too would have taken some form of desperate action. No doubt the police report will detail the simple facts of the matter, without bothering to add the nuances that hold the whole affair together. I'm confident that the report will dryly state that in the early morning of December 5th, I, Benjamin Harper, was found in the darkest corner of Barton Parish Cemetery. I was discovered, the report will say, disturbing a suspected burial site, digging up the cold winter earth below an ancient and twisted wych elm tree, beneath which once lay the remains of a wicked and vile occupant. It will also state that in a fit of unrestrainable rage, I attacked 2 policemen with a shovel, rendering them unconscious, so that my grim labor could be completed without interruption. It is not my sanity that I fear for now, rather the possession of my feeble mind and the body it is currently master over. For I am now horridly aware that the mind, soul, and body are not as tightly entwined as the so-called experts of medical and spiritual matters believe them to be, but are instead 3 separate spheres of mastery. I can only hope that the truth of my tale is fully appreciated before an all too familiar terror is forced upon my mind. For I now wonder if wickedness and insanity are truly mental conditions or some form of spiritual sickness. can either be inherited, carried in the blood, and passed on to our descendants? Can they transfuse from parents to their children? If so, what other darkness can be inherited, carried along the roots of our family history? Is it possible that sin itself can plunge endlessly in the crimson rapids of our ancestors' veins, biding its time, patiently waiting for the chance to emerge within the next generation? I confess to you, gentlemen, that I am uncertain as to the authenticity of what I am about to tell you. The terrible truth is that ever since I came to Byron House, I cannot recall if what happened was but a dream. Even now, I cannot say with any certainty that I am awake, or simply dreaming that I am awake. The boundary between reality and hallucination is a frail shroud, indeed, and who can say from which side of the curtain any of us is truly peeking? Hark, gentlemen. Hearken unto me. I beseech you to take heed of my words. There is something wicked out there in the backwoods and borders of our village. Though its earthy fetters have been laid to waste, the potency of its spirit lingers. In time, it will find a new home and set its powers against us. For the sake of my soul, as well as the soul of my dear friend, I will now try to recount for you in detail that blasphemous chain of events that led me to the grave of Francis Ellis Pendle, the occupant of that hidden burial chamber, and immerse his body in acid until nothing but bubbling black sludge remained. Stephen Adams had been a family friend for as long as I could remember. A devout man of God, he had been the local vicar since I was a young boy and was very much loved by the community he served. He never married or had much in the way of a family of his own, and as such, I think he had always looked at me and my mother as his own flesh and blood. In the twilight of my teenage years, my father sadly passed away from a heart attack, and my relationship with Stephen grew stronger, forming a bond that nurtured me into manhood and shaped me into the person I am today. For this, I owe Stephen a debt of gratitude, one I hope I came close to repaying when I finally destroyed the horror that had inflicted itself upon his life on that lonely December night. Stephen was a true paragon, godly, honorable, and wise. He was devoid of vice and all the other flaws inherent in most of us. I never once saw him grow angry, or fearful, or dispassionate at any point, save towards the very end. Despite his almost saintly behavior, the man was also incredibly human and very much interested in matters of science as well as faith. He had on occasion said that Darwin's theories made a lot of sense and that he enjoyed reading books covering topics such as biology as well as chemistry, physics, and history. He was a remarkably well-rounded and well-adjusted man. Not once did his belief in God falter. He was just able to see the sense of how the world worked and blended it into his love of his fellow man and in the Almighty. When I came of age, I decided to follow in his footsteps and join the church myself. I can't say my mother was particularly pleased with my choice, but Stephen was very proud of me, and it was this approval that fueled my desire to serve my God and community just as he did. My mother had never been warm with Stephen, despite how closely he associated with us both. I suspected that they had once harbored feelings for each other, and that these had turned sour around the time of my birth. My father had never allowed this matter to interfere with their own friendship, and they had been like brothers, right up until my father's last breath. It was Stephen who had been at my father's deathbed, who had spoken kind words into his ear as he gasped for breath, and who had given a moving eulogy as his casket was lowered into the ground. I don't recall my mother ever mentioning my father's death after the funeral, nor had I once seen her cry or lament his passing. She simply grew colder and more distant with the people around her, including both me and Stephen. As such, I didn't feel burdened by my decision to leave her and Barton behind. My heart wasn't heavy at the thought, but rather the opposite. Stephen assisted my decision to join the ministry, and as I spoke to several authorities from the Diocese of Chester and attended an interview with my bishop, my resolve to become ordained only grew stronger. By the time I had secured my place at the Theological College in Worcestershire, my mother had slowly come to terms with my choice, but I never received her blessing or encouragement for treading the path I was determined to embark upon. Worcestershire wasn't close to Cheshire. A 5-hour train journey was required whenever I wished to visit my family home. I remained in contact with Stephen weekly via letter, and regularly a handwritten note in a telltale stiff card envelope would arrive for me in the post. Our correspondence wasn't particularly thrilling, but it was welcomed as his letters of encouragement helped to guide me through the more difficult parts of my study and fire up in me a conviction that only he could coax. Months of grueling study passed me by, and I am not too proud to admit that I occasionally regretted my choice. During these bouts of demoralization, I would call my mother, who would delight in such talk and beg me to return home. A gesture I found bemusing, considering her absent feelings for me were part of the reason that I chose to leave Barton. It was Stephen's letters, however, that held me back and kept me upon the path I had chosen for myself. On rare breaks, I would return to Barton for brief stays and would check in on my friend, and we would chat about the various topics we had discussed in our exchange of letters. Stephen's main areas of interests had changed drastically in the months I had been gone, and he was now ferociously researching local Cheshire history, in particular, our folklore and other esoteric matters, the details of which were lost on me. I would make a token effort of visiting Mother, but the blanket of cold repression that fell across the kitchen as we sat there in silence over a pot of tea was becoming more and more unbearable. Once or twice, I felt as if she wanted to tell me something, but she would stop herself before anything significant left her lips, and she would instead inquire sarcastically as to Stephen's well-being, before reaffirming her objection towards my study. But as time passed, these sojourns to Barton ceased altogether as I threw myself deeper and deeper into theological pursuits, relying solely upon Stephen's letters to keep me informed about how my mother was faring. It had been some weeks before I noticed a gradual change to my routine that piqued my interest in matters beyond my own affairs. So engrossed had I been in my studies that I had neglected to notice that Stephen's letters to me had abruptly stopped. I waited a week before sending him a note of my own in hopes of a response, but nothing came. I could only assume that he had become engrossed in study himself, as he had the habit of picking up a new topic and devouring as much information on it as he could before finding a new sphere of knowledge to move on to. To be quite honest, I was focused on my own study, and so welcomed the break in my weekly task of finding something interesting to fill my letters with. This absence of communication lasted just under 5 weeks, when eventually one of Stephen's letters arrived for me on a Friday morning. I was already on my way out, and so opened the letter and read its contents whilst walking to the local parish I was helping to curate at. Dodging traffic and pedestrians alike, I read the note and folded it into my pocket, determined to pen my reply as soon as time permitted. As best as my memory serves me, the much-delayed letter read as follows. Benjamin, firstly, let me apologize for my lack of communication with you over the past few weeks. I have, as you may have figured out for yourself, stumbled upon a fascinating area of Cheshire history that our own parish was directly involved in some 2 centuries ago. Now, I understand that this is hardly an excuse for neglecting you, and I sincerely apologize if my absence has caused you any worry. Please read on, and I shall attempt to explain. I have been investigating our parish's history, and in doing so, come across an obscure piece of information that points to a witch trial taking place within our community. Well, after the Witchcraft Act of 1735 had forbidden all forms of necromancy and sorcery from being punishable crimes. How scandalous to think that our dear community of Barton was involved in some sordid affair, well after such matters had ceased to be acknowledged by the Crown. Details are sketchy, but it seems much of the affair was conducted in secret, and many later records destroyed in order to prevent the facts surrounding it from ever resurfacing. Now, here comes the really intriguing part. The individual tried and executed for practicing witchcraft is none other than a distant relative of mine on my mother's side, one Francis Ellis Pendle. This is how I was able to unearth certain details, as they have been sat in my family's records for over a century. The whole matter has me deeply excited, and I am currently waiting on several sources to provide me with information on various subjects, but I believe I am close to worming out the truth. But I have reason to believe that this ancestor is buried right here in the parish cemetery. Try as I might, I cannot find a grave. But from what I have read, witches were sometimes buried in unmarked plots, a curse upon their names, and a final punishment for trucking with the devil. It was also a precaution, for if any of their coven could unearth the remains. They could restore them to life. Or so the folklore goes. But here I am, getting ahead of myself again. How have you been, my boy? I look forward to hearing about the past few weeks I've missed out on. So please, furnish me with all the details. I understand you will be finishing your first year soon. And once you have, I ask that you come to stay with me in Barton for a while, for there is much we must discuss about my findings. Take care of yourself, Benjamin. Yours truly, Stephen. The letter did not unnerve me in the least. It was just like him to find some new topic to obsess over. And I thought little about them. Stephen had always been this way. No doubt in his next letter, he would be talking just as enthusiastically about a completely different topic, with witchcraft far from his mind. I wrote a meager reply that night. Nothing terribly fancy. Just a passive interest in what he had mentioned, and also a little update on how my own studies were progressing. I responded to his invitation to join him at Barton Parish, and said that it would be a pleasure to spend some time with him. After my first year was finished, I was able to come home for Christmas. To my delight, my mother invited Stephen to our home for lunch. Christmas itself is a busy time for the ordained, but I was grateful for the snatches of conversation we managed to have. To my surprise, Stephen had not dropped his inquiries into his ancestor and the various Cheshire witch trials, both legal and illegal, that had occurred in the county. In fact, he would speak of little else during my short stay with him. He was particularly excited because he believed he had finally located where Francis Ellis Pendle had been laid to rest. He described to me in great detail over a brandy that at the very back of the cemetery, close to where the Gunner's Clough woodland starts to encroach upon the hallowed ground, there can be found a small copse of witch elm trees, so called because witches were once hanged from them. It was his belief that Francis had been interred in the ground beneath one of these trees, a precaution levied against him, as the old folk believed that the roots of a tree would pin the witch's body and soul in place, denying either the power to rise from their grave and avenge themselves upon the living. The next morning, he took me out to see the copse where he suspected the final resting place of his witch ancestor lay. Even in the daytime, it was a dark and blasted place. The trees looked more dead than alive, with twisting dry branches that groaned like the creaking of a floorboard as the wind lightly danced around them. Here, somewhere beneath the dark ground, Stephen was convinced that the body of Francis lay. I cannot say with conviction that even then I was worried about him. I had convinced myself that his interest was purely historical. He was nothing more than an enthusiastic amateur. In hindsight, however, the warning signs were undoubtedly present. I would come and visit Barton sporadically during my second and third years at the college. I think I was subconsciously outgrowing the place, but in the best possible way. I was shaping into the man I always wanted to be, and I felt renewed by my growing independence from both Stephen and my mother. It was during the last part of my ordination, my final year, that I first heard the growing rumors regarding Stephen and his radical change in behavior. The source of such gossip came from none other than my mother. There was a certain sense of satisfaction in her tone upon informing me of the various distasteful exploits that Stephen was being accused of. He was now apparently drinking heavily and had been spotted meeting with certain unsavory types after dark. Strange visitors had been seen in the cemetery, always at night. He was, she said, keeping company with odd strangers who spoke in foreign tongues and who wore bizarre clothing. Loud, violent behavior in the middle of the night was becoming a regular occurrence for his neighbors, as voices were heard emanating from the church house at all hours. There was even talk that several pets had gone missing in the village. In particular, Mrs. Dibowich's tabby cat, Cleo, and Old Man Slater's greyhound, Basil. The latter was known to roam freely around the village and was almost always in constant trouble, tipping over rubbish bins and chasing Jack Duncalf's chickens. Some people assumed that the dog had either run off or been hit by a car, but a fair number attributed a more ominous reason behind the dog's sudden vanishing. The cat, however, was rarely seen outside of the Zidibets' home. Many assumed that the eldest son, Ian, was the culprit. The boy had always had a cruel streak and was disliked by almost everyone in the village, including his own mother. But when the decayed headless body of a cat and the severed head of a greyhound were found casually discarded in the Gunner's Clough by some local children, the day after Walpurgis, many began to suspect that Stephen's sinister new acquaintances were responsible. The most disturbing revelation, however, was that Stephen's face appeared to have taken on a rather unusual countenance, a kind of sardonic smirk that greatly unnerved those who saw it. By all rights, the expression was wholly alien to the man, and when seen, it appeared to twist his face to such an extent that he looked like a stranger. The Bishop of the Chester Diocese had issued him with a formal warning about his behavior, the outcome of which I would soon learn of. At the time, I found all of this impossible to believe. The evils being attributed to my friend were nothing more than village gossip, I believed, and the usual Barton superstitions. Abruptly, something for the old codgers to grumble over whilst deep in their cups, and I refused to accept the rumors or take the matter seriously. Soon enough, however, I too became embroiled in the abnormal changes in Stephen's life. Again, there was a period of time where I didn't receive regular correspondence from Stephen. In fact, these periods had grown more frequent. But I admit that I was beginning to grow worried as the rumors regarding his behavior churned over in my mind, and the large gulf between his letters was growing ever wider as time passed. I hadn't received a letter back from him for a very long time, perhaps 4 months. But when I finally did, it was far more disturbing than anything I had ever read from him, and it filled me with an urgent need to see my friend and assist him however I could. It arrived for me unexpected, much like the previous one I have described, and despite looking like a letter from Stephen, It was so hastily scrawled that for a few seconds I thought it written by a stranger. Benjamin, I'm afraid to tell you this, but I fear I have led myself down a dark and winding path. So far have I descended into darkness, and so deeply have I gazed at the blackness, that I wonder if I will ever be able to find my way back to the Lord's light. My meddling in the past affairs of the parish and my own family history have brought me nothing but misery. I am doomed. It's the dreams, Ben. The hideous dreams. I dream constantly, so much so that I can no longer tell what is real and what is fantasy. I dream often of a cold, godless place, devoid of warmth and comfort. Above me, I see twisting black roots worming their way slowly towards me, like serpents. Try as I might, I cannot move my arms and legs, for my body is confined to a casket, a buried, rotting, maggot-infested casket. When I finally awake, the clock by my bedside always displays the same time, 3 a.m., the witching hour. By the time you read this, I may not be at the parish. I must leave this place, leave Barton, and never return. I have some dire matters to attend to. Most importantly, I must return that which I have called. He has his own black designs, and I must ensure that they never come to fruition. In my more lucid moments, I am formulating a plan, but I must be prudent, lest he suspects me of acting. I must be decisive and deliberate in my actions and conceal all evidence from him before the sun sets and his time begins. He has his means, that is beyond doubt, but I also have mine. I know of certain antique formulas and signs that can ward off his spirit, potent as it may be. Once I am sure that this evil is returned to the cold ground, his remains must be destroyed. Fire is no good. It will leave too much intact. It must be something stronger, something that will obliterate him until there is nothing left. I will then take my leave. I have already spoken with the bishop, and we both agree that you are ready to take my place. Ben, may you be a better guide to the people of this parish than I. Ben, if I fail in my endeavors, I can offer you only this warning. Fear that which lurks beneath the witch tree. Do not invite it in, for it will make for itself a home within you, and through you work its black magic. It will invoke those who lurk at the threshold, those unnameable blasphemies from the great outside. And then, my friend, we are all ruined. God bless you, Stephen. To say that this letter disturbed me greatly would be a gross understatement. I had never known my friend to be so worried or panicked over anything in his life, and yet here he was, telling me that his very soul was in jeopardy. I spoke with my superiors at the college, but I did not show them the note Stephen had sent me. I feared that should anyone else read the note, they would question his sanity, and that might put into motion a whole course of events, regrettable to the man's already frayed reputation. No, best I speak to him first and get to the root of the issue. A few days later, I was on a train and bound home for Barton. I disembarked at the nearby Eastwich station and caught a rickety old bus into the village. arriving around midday, and hastily made my way in the direction of the parish church. Several locals recognized me, and I had to pause momentarily for a few quick exchanges before resuming my journey. I did my best not to look panicked and to keep my gait to an acceptable stride as I gave each passerby my time. But deep inside, I was overcome with a crippling dread that only increased as I neared my destination. When at last I arrived at the church gates, I found them closed, but not barred. Pushing their heavy iron frame inwards, I walked past the small stone fountain, which was bone dry and not flowing with the gentle trickling sound that usually welcomed visitors. The surrounding benches that crowned the fountain were empty, as was the entire churchyard and cemetery. I couldn't help but notice the serene, yet disturbing quiet of the place as I headed straight for the church doors, which were worryingly locked. I looked around puzzled. Stephen should have been inside and getting ready for the evening service. I picked up my bags and made my way around the church and towards the small residence at the back where Stephen lived. The front door, like that of the church, was locked. The curtains were open, and I peeped inside, but could see no signs of life. I then did a quick tour of the perimeter, knocking and calling on every door and window before returning to the front. I assured myself that there must be a perfectly mundane excuse for him not being present at the church, and mused that maybe he was out picking up provisions from Littler's store on Townfield Lane. The relief of such a normal explanation was abruptly shattered, however, by the gruff and familiar voice of a man barking out to me from the direction of the cemetery. "Vicar's gone, Ben, and I don't suppose he's coming back anytime soon." I cocked my head in the direction of the voice and called out, my words feebly battling the expanding gusts of wind that were coalescing piles of brown autumn leaves, causing them to dance around the dry gray fountain behind me. "Is that you, Ted?" I called out, already knowing the answer to my question. To meet my reply, the tall and wiry frame of old Ted Quilt slowly emerged from behind a large headstone. He had a small shovel in one hand and was no doubt tending to the earth around the cemetery, just as he had for as long as I could recall. Despite the autumn chill, he wiped sweat from his brow and waved at me before picking up his tools. As he made his way towards me, his long white hair and beard billowing in the wind, I could not banish thoughts of the old pagan gods from my mind. With his towering height and wizened but friendly old face, he reminded me of Woden, the chieftain of the gods and leader of the dreaded wild hunt from the old Saxon legends. "Sorry, Ben, didn't scare you, did I? I heard you come in. Well, I heard the gate clang. Figured I let you look around before speaking up." "No, it's quite all right, Ted," I replied. "What did you mean just now? That Stephen was gone and wouldn't be coming back?" "Best if you come inside, boy," he said solemnly. "The vicar left me some instructions for you, and the keys to his house. Come on, I'll make us some tea." He rested one of his giant hands on my shoulder. "I won't lie to you, Ben. I've got some queer things to tell you." With that, he pulled the front door key from the back of his tattered trousers and unlocked the front door of Stephen's house, causing the lock to make a heavy clunking sound as the door opened ajar. He entered, and I followed behind, still confused as to what I could have missed in the time since I last heard from Stephen. Ted immediately headed for the kitchen, where, true to his word, he put on a pot of tea and then sat down to roll himself a cigarette whilst waiting for the tea to brew. Hungry? He turned to ask me, scraping his tongue across the cigarette's paper skin and gesturing to some biscuits on a nearby plate. Later, perhaps, I replied with a weak smile. The smell of the brewing tea filled the room and offered me a little comfort. Stephen had always appreciated a strong tea. I placed my bags down and looked around the room. It was exactly how I remembered it, untouched and impeccably clean, as was Stephen's fancy. Ted looked quite out of place in such an uncluttered arena. With his wild beard and dirt-stained clothing, he didn't say anything to me, engrossed as he was in his cigarette rolling, which caused me to grow a little impatient with the man. Look, if something has happened to Stephen, you have to let me know quickly, Ted. What is it? He proceeded to pour 2 cups of tea, and after passing one along with a small jug of milk, he struck a match and lit his cigarette before leaning back in his chair and sighing. There isn't an easy way to say this, Ben, so I'll just come out with it. Stephen has left the parish. His ways, shall we say, over the last few months have been unnerving many of the parishioners, and the bishop felt it was in everyone's best interest that he takes his leave, at least for a few months. I nodded, not so much in agreement, but simply out of shock. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the last 2 letters Stephen had sent me and handed them over to Ted, who placed his cup on the table and took them into his huge hands without saying a word. He stroked his snow-white beard, whilst intermittingly nodding and sighing as he flitted from page to page, occasionally rereading a section and then nodding once more. Once finished, he handed them back to me, picked up his cup and took a sip, straining the brown liquid through his beard. Do these letters mean anything to you? I asked. A little, he said. ... He was talking about that bloody witchcraft business an awful lot. I knew some of what he was talking about, especially those trees out back, past the graveyard. I used to play around the Gunner's Clough as a boy, and there was always tell about how evil that place was. From Barton, you must have heard the old tales about ghosts and goblins, and how old Saltpeter would get you if you lingered too long past sundown. I replied with a smile, recalling the childhood memory of how my grandfather would warn me of entering the Gunner's Clough after dark. You stay away from those woods, boy, he would say. Saltpeter, Salty Pete, some call him. On 3 legs he goes. He'll trick you into the woods using the voice of someone you know. That's just an old wives' tale, Ted, I finally replied. Stephen would never have taken such talk seriously. Imps and witches' familiars. It's just childish superstition. Well, I can't argue with you there, Ben, he said, taking another sip of his tea. But it was more the weird changes in his nature that I wanted to talk to you about. Not all this witchy nonsense. He tapped the letters on the table, as if to emphasize how little he thought of their contents. Such as? I said, picking up my own cup. Well, couple of folks rumbled him good to the bishop over his nightly doings. They say he'd been calling regularly with shady types from Eastwich, and that he was involved in some missing money here at the parish. Quite a sum, if folk are to be believed. Then there's the strange sounds and stranger lights coming from the cemetery. My mother was telling me about this weeks ago. I added. I didn't want to believe her. She's never been too keen on Stephen. Not just that, Ben. It was his whole manner. He just stopped giving a damn about the community. Grew slack in his duty. And you know that's not Stephen. He turned into this cruel, morose man. Almost a complete stranger, really. Unsettled a lot of the locals. He took a few more sips of his tea and finished his cigarette before continuing. So there was a village meeting, and with the agreement of the diocese in Chester and the bishop, it was decided that he should leave us. Can't say I know where he's gone, but I reckon they'd want you to take over his duties, if you're willing, at least until the bishop can find a replacement. He stood up and opened a nearby drawer, producing a sealed letter. It bore the mark of the Chester Diocese. Opening it, its contents confirmed what Ted was hinting at. I didn't know what to say. I was supposed to start my tenure as a curate under Stephen, not become the village vicar. Why didn't Bishop Ellison speak to me directly about this? I said. Ted simply shrugged before continuing. There's something else you should know, Ben. You brace yourself, because what I have to say next is going to upset you. I stiffened my back in response and allowed him to continue. Some believe that Stephen may be dead. I opened my mouth to reply, but he raised his hand. Let me finish. I said some believe he may be dead, but that doesn't make it so. Nonetheless, no one has heard hide nor hair of him since he left. Phil Crouch heard a rumor that a man who looked just like Stephen had been spotted down by the locks a few nights ago. You know the ones, on the river, down past the canal that runs through Blackcroft. He was ranting and raving. Stephen, that is, almost as if he was having a quarrel with himself. Well, Phil says he came out to see what the fuss was, and he swears, hands down, that he saw Stephen throw himself into the locks. He told the local bobbies about what he seen, but they couldn't find anything amiss. I thought you should know, lest you hear it from someone else, in less favorable terms. I felt my world come crashing down around me. This was too much for me to absorb at once. Every man, be he a saint or a sinner, has his share of faults. But to hear of these developments, coupled with the last letter Stephen had sent me, and the news that he may have killed himself, not to mention the expectation that I should take his place at the parish. I'll need time to think about this, Ted, I said, standing up slowly. He nodded and finished his drink before standing himself. I understand, he replied. Look, no one is expecting you to hold a service or anything. The whole village knows the situation, and I just think they and the council are glad to have you here. You won't have to perform any public services. Not until you are good and ready, at least. No doubt a replacement will be found before too long. And try not to worry too much about what Phil Crouch says. You know him. Stupefied with drink half the time. I'm sure Stephen is fine. He's probably just taking the time he needs. He pointed to the keys on the table. These are yours until it's all sorted out. Look, I best get back to work out there. If you need me, just say so. But I hope you'll stay. Patting me on the shoulder, Ted left, leaving me sat alone in the kitchen. My mind was ablaze with confusion and doubt. Just what chaos had I returned to? It took no small amount of time for me to settle into the house. I avoided going into town at all costs and only received the minimal amount of visitors, many of which were only at my door seeking gossip. I quickly dismissed the worst of them and focused instead on the genuine well-wishers and sympathizers, of which there was depressingly few. Apart from Ted, the only person I spoke to regularly was my mother, who was less than supportive with the whole matter and only offered a few snipes about the man I had come to think of as my father. I spent the rest of my time in the church, taking care of daily chores and wandering around the cemetery, where I would occasionally bump into Ted and have a short, pleasant, though sterile, conversation about the weather before moving on. The days were growing colder, and I would frequently bring him hot tea and food as he worked relentlessly on maintaining the church grounds, especially those close to where the feral brambles of the Gunner's Clough constantly encroached. He wasn't bad company by any means, but as the days turned into weeks, we found less and less to talk about. I also kept in constant contact with Bishop Ellison, who offered me all the support he could in running the parish. He was confident that a replacement for Stephen would be found quickly, but was very sensitive about discussing it in detail, knowing just how close he had been to me. It was during one of these many daily excursions around the churchyard that I decided to revisit the wych elm trees that Stephen had once shown me. I had explored most of the large open cemetery and decided to walk around the far back end, which borders with the Gunner's Clough. I cannot state with any clear conviction what had possessed me to walk along that lonesome and lonely stretch of graveyard, crammed as it was with crumbling tombstones, the names of their occupants, long since worn away by the passage of time. In the shade of those large forsaken trees, there rested some of the oldest and most decrepit headstones in the whole cemetery. Many of them leaned at steep angles, and some had toppled over entirely, their surfaces now home to moss and lichen. I passed each in turn, trying in vain to make out the names and dates that had been washed away by the relentless rain of northwest England, until I came across the wych elm trees, once more nestled at the very back of the copse, deep in the shadows of a particularly diseased-looking tree. I could see a patch of ground that appeared to have been freshly excavated. I made my way closer and stood in front of it, noticing that a small carved stone had been half submerged in the recently disturbed soil. It was green and furry with moss. I bent down and I ran my hand around it and found the clumps of moss growing upon its surface easy enough to pull off. Beneath the vegetation, I could spy that there was an inscription and a date chiseled into the sandstone underneath where the moss had preserved it. Here lies Francis Ellis Pendle, beloved by the devil, unforgotten by his disciples, 1751 AD. The carving was undoubtedly old, and despite the protection afforded to it by the moss, it was still eroded and worn away in parts. As I pulled the stone out of the earth, I noticed a newer, fresher-looking carving on the back. It was an odd shape, some kind of hieroglyph. It's difficult to truly say just what it was. It appeared somewhat similar to a pagan pentagram, but the lines were broken, resulting in a series of independent points, in the middle of which there sat what looked like a lozenge-shaped eye. In place of a pupil, there was instead a small flame-like shape. The symbol must have been heathen in origin, for I had never encountered its like in all my years of religious studies. The whole stone was perhaps only 10 inches in height, hardly what one would call a tombstone, but appearing to hold the same purpose. Instinctively, I dropped the stone close to where I had found it and rubbed the dirt off of my hands. I felt as if I had just come into contact with something unmistakably evil, as if my very soul had been touched by the hoary and eldritch nature of whatever darkness it had been used to commemorate. It was then that the words from Stephen's last note crept into my mind. Fear that which lurks beneath the witch tree. Do not invite it in, for it will make for itself a home within you, and through you work its black magic. The hour was growing late, and the dimming sun caused the darkness of the gunner's cloud to wash over me. I made my way back to the house, determined to reach it before the sun disappeared behind the trees. Once inside, I could not banish the warning from Stephen's letter. I took the bundle of Stephen's letters from the kitchen drawer and sifted through them until I found the one that mentioned his talk of witchcraft. I unfolded it and reread it until I came to the passage with the warning. I had remembered it verbatim. I folded up the letters and placed them back into the drawer. A moment later, Ted came into the kitchen. I waited a few minutes before broaching the subject of Stephen and his strange decline. So, Ted, did Stephen ever mention a grave to you? One out in the yard, close to the woods? He nodded. I saw him looking over it a bunch of times. He told me it was the grave of a witch, hung for his crimes hundreds of years ago. One of the last in England, he reckoned. And that was what he was studying before this change of character came over him? He nodded. Studied is one way of putting it. Obsession would be another. He converted the cellar of this house into some kind of study, filled with all sorts of books, some in Latin, some in German, and others in languages I can't even identify. He also moved chemicals and equipment into there. Is it still there, in the cellar? I asked. No. I reckon he took almost everything with him when the bishop told him to leave. Might be some bits left, but not much. The next day, acting on a hunch, I contacted Eastwich College and asked to speak to their head, Lee Humphrey. He confirmed that he and Stephen had corresponded about lab equipment, chemicals, compounds, and acids. He listed names I didn't understand. I thanked him and hung up, a few more pieces of the puzzle falling into place. Witchcraft and science, chemistry and an obsession with a 200-year-old hidden grave. How did they connect? Determined to uncover more, I decided to visit the library Stephen had set up, and then dismantled. During that time, we were separated. The entrance to the cellar was in the kitchen, behind a narrow door that I first presumed to have been a broom cupboard. It concealed a flight of cold stone steps that led to a distinctly dank and musty underground room. A few cramped shelves on the walls, either side of the steps, housed a collection of mundane objects, candles, dried out paint cans, and the like, but also luckily a working torch. I took the ladder and switched it on. As I descended, I reached the bottom and found an open doorway to my right, which led into a very simple, square room that, like the stairs, possessed an oppressively low ceiling and a strong, musty scent. I entered the cellar, relying upon the feeble cone of sickly yellow light emanating from the torch to make out any firm details from the malaise of murky darkness beyond. A large rotting wooden table served as a centerpiece for the room, and there were rows of badly handmade shelves lining the back wall, sagging and leaning at odd angles. The shelves were mostly barren, but there was evidence in the dust that a large collection of books had once stood here, and a bare steel skeleton of chemistry equipment and a few empty bottles sat on the desk. As I moved the light around, it reflected off several large bottles on another shelf to my right. Large, thick, almost barrel-like. Most were full of clear yellow liquids. Others were nut brown oil in color. A few were marked with hastily scrawled labels that read, Royal Water. Beyond the collection of chemicals, there was a door that appeared to lead out of the cellar. This confused me, for I could not recall any outside entrance that led to the cellar beneath the house. The door itself looked ancient, with its rusted bolt and handle barely holding on to the crumbling wood to which they were both crudely nailed into. As I moved closer to it, the light from my torch caught something carved into the frame above the door. It was that curious star hieroglyph I had seen on the stone above the grave of Francis Ellis Pendle. I ran my finger along the carving, almost as if to ascertain that it was real. As my finger traced the freakish shape, I felt a chill creep over me. The same chill that had caused me to flee from the shadows of the Wych Elms. This time, I refused to let the fear grip me, taking the door by its rusted handle and pushing it inward. To my surprise, the door did not lead to the outside of the house, but instead revealed another set of stone stairs, leading further down into the earth. The odor that assaulted my senses as I took a solitary step towards those stairs was foul. It was a putrid stench, unlike anything I had ever smelt before. If I was to describe it as an ungodly mixture of some acidic compound and rotting excrement, I would be on the verge of doing justice to that malignant, invasive scent. I instinctively took a step back and raised my hand to cover my nose, as if it would somehow relieve me of the burden of breathing in that foul and fetid air. For a brief moment, I considered turning around and leaving the cellar, but out of burning curiosity, I slowly started to descend those awful stairs. What lay at the bottom is something that will haunt me until my final days. For laying beyond was a second chamber, not unlike the first. But whereas the above cellar space had been converted into some kind of perverse amalgamation of esoteric library and alchemist's laboratory, this hidden chamber was nothing less than the devil's workshop. Strange images were carved and painted onto the walls, many of them resembling the hieroglyph I had seen on the meager gravestone of Francis Ellis Pendle. There was little to tie the various pictographs together. Some depicted spheres or eyeballs. Others were long, snake-like tendrils that curled upon themselves to create a rudimentary alien text. As I edged further into the room, I could make out various objects nailed to the ceiling. Some were rusted tools, like the kind you would find at a slaughterhouse. Others were odd assortments of twigs held together with twine, creating shapes that had a vague human outline to them. The crowning horror, however, was the table. This long stone edifice was less a desk and more like a butcher's slab, stained a hideous reddish brown all over. There were grooves carved into the table's surface, all of which culminated towards a round hole, underneath which a rusted iron bucket had been attached. It was from this bucket that the stench appeared to originate, and bending down to inspect its contents, I could see the glistening, rotting hind limb of a dog. Maggots wriggled across its surface, burrowing in and out of the putrid flesh. I felt bile rise in my throat, but I managed to keep it down and continue my investigation. Like the room above, there were shelves fitted to the walls, but these were not bare, instead being filled to the brim with various manuscripts, papers, maps, and glass jars. The whole scene had an unmistakable sense of the bygone laid over it, as if it had sat here undisturbed for centuries. Among the papers and jars, I found a small linen bag tied with a piece of string. A brown stain on the bag's underside made me think twice about opening it, but I eventually found the courage to do so. Inside were numerous small white objects that looked like tiny stones, but upon tipping the contents out and inspecting them with the torch, I found to my horror that they were children's teeth. By this time, the smell was becoming unbearable, and I had no wish to linger further. Deciding to abandon my investigation, I spied a small, frayed notebook left on the right-hand corner of what I now thought of as a vivisectionist's table. For whatever reason, I could not then fathom, the curious woodblock image on the front must have caught my eye, and I picked the book up and tucked it into my jacket before making my way back to the sanity of the house above. I immediately removed my jacket and threw it onto the kitchen table, disgusted that the terrible stench from below had somehow attached itself to me like a parasite. I then methodically opened all the windows of the house, hoping that the chill air would purify the hideous odor that had made a nest for itself in my nostrils. Tired, my poor mind swirling from the revelations of that hypogean realm, I eventually collapsed onto my bed and succumbed to exhaustion. I cannot say how long I had been slumbering when the first of those terrible dreams came to me. My sense of time had been grossly warped by my exploration in the cellar. But it must have been quite sudden, as the sun was still in the sky when I finally jolted awake, my pillow wet with sweat. It is impossible for me to tell if the dreams were brought on by Stephen's final letters, or if that hidden chamber below the house had awoken something macabre and unwelcome in my imagination. I found myself standing within the cemetery outside, only it was different. The land around me was sparser, with fewer tombstones jutting out of the soft, mossy ground. The gunner's cloth lay before me, its outline far more feral and foreboding than it had any right to be. The sky above me was a blackened abyss, punctured by thousands of twinkling stars that glittered and gleamed from the great beyond. The fat silver moon slowly crept above the tree line, casting its pale white light upon the cemetery, causing long, deep shadows to detach from the headstones and crawl upon the ground towards me. I took a few steps back, but they still found me, chilling me as they swept over my feet, legs, and body. Then, out of the tangled briars he came, hopping and gamboling out of the brambles, the awful form of Saltpeter. On 3 legs he danced, the sleek body of a greyhound, upon the neck of which there leaned and swayed the head of a cat. His eyes were milky orbs, faintly illuminated like phosphorus toadstools. From his feline jaws there dripped a reddish, clear syrup that hissed as it hit the sanctified ground of the graveyard. He momentarily ceased his insistent frolicking to scratch himself. But I could see that it was his missing back leg that was attempting the impossible task. A raw, bloody stump that gesticulated feebly towards the source of his irritation. Then, beyond the twitching imp, I could see another figure, a man. Even at this distance, I could make out the repulsive details of his form. He was tall and thin, his long, slender fingers like twigs. His lengthy nose and sunken eyes were clearly visible through the cemetery gloom. Worst of all, a sardonic and wolfish grin lay stretched across his face. There was a hunger in that smirk, a deep and terrible burning hunger. Then Saltpeter ceased his scratching, and in a hollow voice that somehow sounded like my mother's, spoke these words. "Come, child, come. We have marmalade and marzipan, and all manner of baked treats for you. We have seed cakes and toffee apples, all that your heart desires. Come with me into the forest, and I will show you delights beyond your dreams." I felt myself being pulled towards those honeyed words. All the while, the tall, sinister man said nothing, only grinning at me from beneath his wide-brimmed hat. "I can't," I stuttered. "It's dark, and my mother will want me home for supper." "Supper," replied Saltpeter, his rotting pale tongue licking across his chops. "Oh, we shall have supper, won't we, master?" The imp then looked up towards the terrible man, who stayed silent while nodding his head in agreement. I tried once more to turn away, but my feet were spellbound, marching me towards what I knew to be my demise. "Mother," I cried out. "Mother, please! I am scared!" The terrible man laughed as Saltpeter rubbed himself upon his master's blood-stained breeches, a wheezing purr emanating from his twisted form. "Mother!" I cried once more, the words mercifully pulling me back from the precipice of my dreaming madness. "Mother!" I whimpered, awake now, and once more in my bed. To say that the dream, the nightmare, had unnerved me would be a lie. In fact, it was all I could think of for the next few days. I did not dare to sleep again on that first day, and instead plied myself with the strong Turkish coffee that Stephen had kept hidden away for special guests. When I finally did succumb to sleep the next day, my dreams were less vivid and mercifully brief. I felt the presence of Saltpeter and the terrible man on several occasions, but managed to awaken myself before they could make themselves known. I also dreamt often of the gunner's clough and of the outre copse of wych elm trees that lay beyond. A manuscript I had taken from the hidden cellar chamber lay forgotten on the kitchen table during this haunted time, until by chance, a week or so later, I happened to find it beneath a small pile of local newspapers that Ted had been collecting. I was once again taken aback by the grotesque, demoniacal woodblock printing on the front of the manuscript. Sitting down and inspecting it further, I could see roughly a dozen or so figures depicted in the image. Most were what I would describe as crones and hags, many of them riding upon the backs of black goats and other less discernible creatures. Various furtive, demoniac characters were also shown, some of them dancing and copulating with the crones in disgusting detail. Around them were various smaller figures. I guess you would call them imps or familiars of varying anatomy. Many of the figures were oddly named, the text appearing next to them to be what I took for some form of early English. Queer titles such as Pie Wacket, Grizzle Greedygut, and Peak in the Crown. But one of the odious creatures had a name next to its image that caused my heart to jump in my chest for a moment. The image was that of a three-legged hound, bearing the head of a cat. Next to the beast lay the words Saltpeter. I paused for a moment, images of that terrible nightmare playing out in my mind like a perverse pantomime. I glanced back at the yellowed manuscript. There was no title on the front, so I slowly peeled back the first page. And there, printed in bold black, lay the words, the Sussex manuscript, Cultus Maleficarum. No author or date appeared anywhere in the front or back of the manuscript. But as I flicked through, it opened on a section roughly half of the way through. This particular chapter must have been referenced many times, for the manuscript almost appeared to want to open at this point. I glanced down and saw the title, Calling Upon Thy Black Imp. It almost looked like something out of a cookbook. A repulsive recipe that was half profane culinary instruction and half magical incantation. Odious images accompanied the next page, showing a gnarled crone gleefully chopping up the bodies of rabbits, cats, dogs, and calves with an oversized meat cleaver. I decided to put the manuscript in the kitchen drawer next to Stephen's letters and did my best to banish its foul images from my mind. Days and then weeks passed by, and eventually I managed to put most of the past behind me regarding the horrid manuscript, as well as Stephen and his strange turn of personality. The dreams lingered for a while, but eventually they released me from their grip, and my sleep grew more restful. I resumed my duty as a stand-in vicar with a renewed gusto and opened the church. At first, the locals were slow to return, but as word spread, my Sundays were soon busy, and I found myself welcoming faces new and old to my service. I allowed myself to forget about all this talk of black magic and imps and witches that had plagued my return to the village, and instead focused on serving my community. With the help of a few curates appointed by the bishop to assist me, I even found the courage to descend once more into the cellar and bricked up the entrance that led to the hidden room beyond. Thoughts of Stephen still occasionally crept into my mind, of course, typically in the form of short dreams I still experienced from time to time. But these were less disruptive than my prior nightmares, being less sinister in nature. I had resigned myself to the awful truth that I may never see or hear from Stephen again, and so spent more time with my mother and rekindled a few friendships in the village that had grown cold whilst I was away studying. I grew keenly aware that I was being groomed by the diocese to replace Stephen as the parish priest, and struggled with my conflicting feelings on the matter. I had managed, however, to develop a firm mental robustness that permitted me to carry on with my new daily routine, growing my flock and welcoming the Lord's light and forgiveness into the hearts and minds of my community. Sadly, this period of respite would abruptly end with an event that was singular in its horror and absurdity. It was an event that at a certain time in my life, I would have welcomed wholeheartedly. But now, it was one that filled me with an inescapable, cold dread. For the first time since returning to Barton, I finally received word from Stephen, a note that plunged my mind back into madness. The letter was from Stephen, but this wasn't obvious to me immediately, as it lacked not only the hallmarks of his handwriting, but also that of any normal. The writing was a mere scribble, childish and scratchy. The cramped script appeared as if it had been fighting with itself, as it spilled onto the page in a vain effort to form some kind of discernible legibility. The paper itself was also odd. It appeared to have been torn from a book, as the print and stamp, property of Barton Library, appeared on the opposite side. The paper was also slightly damp, with water stains and a strange grit-like sediment dotted around the written words. The content of the note, as best as I care to remember, was as follows. Ben, don't have long before these hands are not mine. Manage to make it back to my body. I can feel him pulling me back to his. Don't think I can escape again. I will try. Do one last thing for me. I beg you. Beneath the tree. I am beneath the tree and in pain. His spirit is free now. It wants you. My body no longer suitable. Yours is better. I beg you, dig up the earth under the tree. Take what you find beneath and burn it. Not fire, must be acid. Take the royal water and drench his remains in it. None of the essential salts can survive. Do you understand? He can return if you use fire. Dying slowly in the ground. I cannot stand the blackness anymore. I am myself for a few moments, back here in my own rotting body, to write and bring you this note. Soon, I must return to the soil. My own fault. I called him, and he answered. I'm so sorry for bringing you into this madness. Do as I ask. Stephen. The note must have been hand-delivered, for it lacked a stamp or even an address on it. It was simply a folded-up piece of paper with Ben scrawled on the front, in the same spidery penmanship. I needed some fresh air to clear my mind after reading the baffling note and took a brisk walk through the village. The vanishing sun was pleasant enough, but it was punctured cruelly by a cutting wind that caused my skin to shrivel with goosebumps. The village was quiet, and I saw only a few locals as I walked a loop around the village, starting at Townfield Lane, and then along Runcorn Road, and finally back up Lidditt Lane and towards the church. There was so much chaos flowing in my mind that upon returning home, I simply collapsed into a chair in the kitchen table and lay my head down. It weighed heavily upon my heart that Stephen was out there somewhere, either a drooling madman or the victim of some black sorcery that I could barely bring myself to give credence to. But if God and his mighty kingdom were real, as I had been raised to believe, then surely the devil and all the denizens of the pit must be also. This affair did not strike me as madness. There was a revolting authenticity to it, not to mention an alien element that my mind struggled to grapple with in its complexity. As the sun sunk upon that day and gave birth to the inevitable darkness, I found myself drawn to the decanter of brandy that Stephen had kept in the lounge, and indulged myself heartily of its warming contents. The fire, conjured in my throat by the liquor, was very much welcomed, and by the time I had polished off a fourth glass, I was very much under the sway of hypnos, and carried myself numbly to my bed. For the first time in weeks, the dreams returned. I tossed and turned all night, unable to settle. My brain buzzed with 1,000 thoughts as half-imagined fears danced in my mind's eye. There was a horrid semi-realization that my slumbering form was being watched, and more than a few times, I felt my spirit lift out of my body and float above my bed. From this observation point, I could see a dark figure standing in the shadowed corner of my room, his eyes glaring at my sleeping body with an alien hunger. I saw Saltpeter, that hideous abomination, leap upon my bed and paw playfully at my lips. "This one will do nicely." The imp then spoke, once more in a voice that sounded like my mother's. "This one, master, and then we are free." When the morning sun blissfully shined through my bedroom curtains, I was able to banish the night's dread back to whatever foul pit it had spawned from. But each night they returned. Sermons for the following fortnight, designed more to comfort myself than my community. I spoke with fiery conviction how Jesus had defeated both death and the devil, and how with his love there was no evil on the earth that could not be banished. This settled my nerves somewhat, but the comfort of normalcy that I craved eluded me. A few days after receiving his crude note, I learned with great dismay that Stephen's body had been found on the Blackcroft Heath. Though his bloated corpse had been discovered some distance away from both the canal and the nearby river, the coroner ruled his cause of death as drowning. The funeral shortly followed, and I decided to lead the service, despite the bishop offering to take that burden from me. The turnout was higher than I expected, which comforted me, and I even saw my mother shed a few tears for our village's departed vicar. Eventually, with both the terrible dreams and Stephen's demise weighing upon me, I made the decision to step down from the parish and to leave the church entirely. What had once been a dream was rapidly transforming into an unending nightmare. I planned to leave Barton altogether, to never again step foot within its haunted streets. I had concluded that the village was not a good place to linger, and made plans to relocate to Manchester. This decision, final and resolute in my mind, did manage to bring some comfort, and I allowed myself to hope that this whole affair would one day be behind me. I didn't inform the bishop. I was concerned that he would try to convince me to stay. I gave myself no longer than 2 months to wrap up my affairs, and then inform the diocese of my decision. As fate would have it, that decision, along with many others, was stolen from me on that awful night that was to come. The renewed sense of peace brought on by my impending resignation and relocation might have lasted had that crowning horror not invaded my world on that dark December night. I had retired to bed early, but the constant lashing of the rain had been relentless all day and was set to continue throughout the night. I slept fitfully and in sporadic episodes of thrashing, for I was experiencing the most vivid and horrid dream imaginable. I dreamt of being confined, bound in the darkness. My arms worked, but my legs felt numb and lifeless. I struggled ceaselessly to remove myself from this foul bondage, but my body felt like some spindly marionette whose strings had become tangled around my fingers, cutting off the blood flow and leaving them numb and useless. After what seemed like an eternity, I somehow managed to muster what little strength I had and force my form through the cracks of my prison. I dreamt of pushing upwards, forever upwards, past the rotting wood and the soft, wet earth, past the worms and the matted tangle of endless roots, and finally to the cold, rain-lashed surface above. I awoke suddenly with that last thought, sat upright in bed with cooling sweat pouring down my back. But it wasn't the dream that had startled me awake. As my senses adjusted, I could hear that it was the ringing of the church bells that had mercifully returned my mind from the abyss. The clear and familiar sound of ringing bells pierced the night air, and I glanced at my clock to see it was just past 3 a.m. The witching hour, I thought. I jumped out of bed and grabbed my dressing gown. No doubt the noise would eventually awaken the entire village, and I would be to blame. I raced down the stairs and bolted out of the kitchen door into the chill of the night. I barely noticed the cold rain pelting my face as I ran towards the church. My slippers greedily soaked up the muddy water that pooled around my footsteps, and I shuddered as the cold, damp muck sank in between my toes. Determined to stop the emotion, I fumbled with the keys, but the door was already ajar, and I pushed it open and made my way to the main hall and the direction of the bell chamber. By the time I reached the door, the ringing had mysteriously stopped, and I slowed down my pace. As I bent over to catch my breath, I noticed a disgusting trail of mud and slime snaking its way from the doorway and through the hall. It seemed to lead directly to where I was headed. I kneeled and swiped my fingers through the baffling sludge. It possessed a charnel stench, not unlike that foetid aroma that had sickened me in the cellar that terrible day. I immediately pulled a handkerchief from my gown pocket and wiped the horrid jelly from my fingers as best I could. I was determined to find out the cause of the ringing, but it crept over me that there was perhaps a mundane, yet still unnerving explanation. Suppose someone had broken in and was using the bells as a diversion while an accomplice robbed my home, I thought. Still, as much as I would have liked to accept this solution as fact, I felt compelled to investigate the muddy trail. There was little of value in the house that a thief could steal, and even if it was true, I had no desire to confront a burglar in the dead of the night. I therefore slowly entered the tenebrous chamber that housed the bell ropes beyond the main hall. There was a feeble sliver of light that gloamed through the window from the street lamps outside, and I could just make out the basic parameter of the chamber. I was certain that no one else was in the room, and I carefully walked deeper in the darkness to inspect the 6 ropes. All were unmoving, except one, which swayed gently in the dark. Just like the floor outside, there was a smear of foul-smelling mud over the ground, as well on the moving rope. I placed my hand upon it, and it stopped swaying. Then, just as I was considering leaving, I suddenly became aware of a shape on the ground. In the far left corner, my eyes were still adjusting to the dark of the room, but at first, I fancied it looked like a mud-stained bundle of rags and twisted sticks. But as I inspected further, a creeping horror washed over me, along with a terrible recognition of what I was seeing. What did I see? That is at once an easy and a difficult question to answer, and is perhaps at the crux of this whole affair. For lying on the ground in front of me, face, or should I say skull, pressed to the stone floor, was an ancient collection of decayed bones and mummified flesh. Chunks of stinking, sodden earth and flayed, tattered skin were wrapped around the grisly mound of necrosis. It was a brown, spindly thing, more bone than meat, with a whitish, cracked dome for a head. Wrapped around its spine, close to what once passed for a neck, was the rotted, damp rope of the hangman's noose. It was then that I heard a muffled and strained sound emanating from the skeletal horror that lay at my feet. It was at once a whisper and a growl, human and bestial, disembodied and echoing all around me, yet at the same time focused upon that mass of rags and fused bone. The noise ululated into a cry that shook me to the very foundation of my soul, for the voice was that of Stephen Adams. The corpse thing before me issued forth a single sentence before growing still and silent once more. Ben, for the love of God, please, those who have bothered to speak to me at any length know the rest of my story. Half mad and howling with a volatile mixture of fear and fury, I retrieved the yellow chemicals from the basement, and together with the rotting bundle, threw their contents into the self-exhumed grave of Francis Ellis Pendle. At some point, 2 police officers accosted me, but I managed to overcome them and continue my grisly task, dissolving the whole mess into acrid sludge. I watched it bubble and froth into the black soil as the earth reluctantly absorbed the disgusting mass. Despite the obvious horror, I felt a great relief wash over me. The chaos of the past few months of my life came sharply into view, like a knot unraveling before me. Madness gave way to clarity. Though this is the end of my account, it is not the end of the matter. For there was no doubt in my mind that beneath that lonesome wych elm, beneath the cold earth of that hidden grave, the soul of my dear friend, Stephen Adams, had lain incarcerated for months in silent torment. He had called up the wicked soul of his ancestor, for whatever purpose I can now only guess at. He had not been strong enough to put down that which he had called forth, and paid for it with his life and soul. A terrifying spiritual transfusion had taken place. Pendle had taken Stephen's body, and Stephen had been forced into Pendle's. At some point, Stephen had managed to take control of his own body long enough to hurl it into the churning waters of the river, hoping to end that evil which had made a home for itself within him. Stephen had been reduced to a mere consciousness as Pendle's spirit roamed freely. As the witch set about renewing his coven and conjuring up his black imps, Stephen's sentient mind, fully aware with its senses intact, understood with abominable clarity that it now inhabited the 200-year-old corpse of Francis Ellis Pendle. He who had been hung for his crimes against God and King. He who had sought to bargain with the devils of the sky and of the earth. He who had slept restlessly beneath the dark soil of the Gunner's Clough. His presence felt by all who dared enter. He who had dreamt of nothing but the torment and wickedness he would unleash upon the descendants of those who had delivered him to his grave. Dreams of vengeance and dark oaths. Those terrible dreams of blasphemy and madness. The dreams beneath the witch tree. Good evening. If you found your way here tonight, maybe your day's been long. Maybe your mind is still racing a little. Or maybe you just need a voice in the quiet. So, breathe. Let the world slow down, just for a while. Tonight, I'll take you deep into a forest where time doesn't move the way it should. Where someone who wanted to disappear found something that had been waiting. This isn't a story to scare you. Not really. It's a soft tale of silence, of memory, of the kind of hunger that lives under roots and breathes with the trees. So, curl up. Let your eyes grow heavy. And if the woods call to you in your dreams tonight, just remember, not everything that's quiet is safe. I'm a long-haul trucker. I stopped for a lost kid on a deserted highway in the dead of night. What I saw attached to him and the question he asked is why I don't drive anymore. This happened a few years back. I was doing long-haul, mostly cross-country routes, the kind that take you through vast stretches of nothing. You know the ones, where the radio turns to static for hours, and the only sign of life is the occasional pair of headlights going the other way, miles apart. I was young, eager for the miles, the money. Didn't mind the solitude, or so I thought. The route I was on took me across a long, desolate stretch of highway that ran between the borders of two large governmental territories. I don't want to say exactly where, but think big, empty spaces, lots of trees, not much else. It was notorious among drivers for being a dead zone. No signal, no towns, for 100 miles either side, and prone to weird weather. Most guys tried to hit it during daylight, but schedules are schedules. Mine had me crossing it deep in the night, I remember the feeling. Utter blackness outside the sweep of my headlights. The kind of dark that feels like it's pressing in on the cab. The only sounds were the drone of the diesel engine, the hiss of the air brakes now and then, and the rhythmic thrum of the tires on asphalt. Hypnotic. Too hypnotic. I'd been driving for about 10 hours. With a short break a few states back, coffee was wearing off. The dashboard lights were a dull green glow, comforting in a way, but also making the darkness outside seem even more absolute. My eyelids felt like they had lead weights attached. You fight it, you know? Slap your face, roll down the window for a blast of cold air, crank up whatever music you can find that hasn't dissolved into static. I was doing all of that. It must have been around 2 or 3 a.m. I was in that weird state where you're not quite asleep, but not fully awake either. Like your brain is running on low power mode. The white lines on the road were starting to blur together, stretching and warping. Standard fatigue stuff. I remember blinking hard, trying to refocus. That's when I saw it, or thought I saw it. Just a flicker at the edge of my headlights, on the right shoulder of the road. Small, low to the ground. For a split second, I registered a shape, vaguely human-like, and then it was gone, swallowed by the darkness as I passed. My first thought, deer, or a coyote, common enough. But it hadn't moved like an animal. It had been upright. My brain, sluggish as it was, tried to process it. Too small for an adult. Too still for an animal startled by a rig. Then the logical part, the part that was still trying to keep me safe on the road, chimed in. You're tired. Seeing things happens. And I almost accepted that. I really did. Shook my head, took a swig of lukewarm water from the bottle beside me, kept my eyes glued to the road ahead. The image, though, it kind of stuck. A small, upright shape, like a child. No way, I told myself. Out here, middle of nowhere, middle of the night, impossible. Kids don't just wander around on interterritorial highways at 3 a.m. It had to be a trick of the light, a bush, my eyes playing games. I've seen weirder things born of exhaustion. Shadows that dance, trees that look like figures. It's part of the job when you're pushing limits. I drove on for maybe another 30 seconds, the image fading, my rational mind starting to win. Just a figment. Then I glanced at my passenger side mirror. Habit, always checking, and my blood went cold. Not just cold. It felt like it turned to slush. There, illuminated faintly by the red glow of my trailer lights receding into the distance, was the reflection of a small figure, standing on the shoulder of the road, exactly where I thought I'd seen something. It wasn't a bush, it wasn't a shadow. It was small, and it was definitely standing there, unmoving, as my truck pulled further and further away. My heart started hammering against my ribs. This wasn't fatigue. This was real. There was someone, something, back there. And it looked tiny. Every instinct screamed at me. Danger. Wrong. Keep going. But another voice, the one that makes us human, I suppose, whispered something else. A kid? Alone out here? What if they're hurt? Lost? I fought with myself for a few seconds that stretched into an eternity. The image in the mirror was getting smaller, fainter. If I didn't act now, they'd be lost to the darkness again. God, the thought of leaving a child out there. If that's what it was, against my better judgment, against that primal urge to just floor it, I made a decision. I slowed the rig, the air brakes hissing like angry snakes. Pulled over to the shoulder, the truck groaning in protest. Put on my hazards, their rhythmic flashing cutting into the oppressive blackness. Then, I did what you're never supposed to do with a full trailer on a narrow shoulder. I started to reverse, slowly, carefully. My eyes flicking between the mirrors, trying to keep the trailer straight, trying to relocate that tiny figure. The crunch of gravel under the tires sounded unnaturally loud. It took a minute, maybe two, but it felt like an hour. The red glow of my taillights eventually washed over the spot again. And there it was, a kid. I stopped the truck so my cab was roughly alongside them, maybe 10 feet away. Switched on the high beams, hoping to get a better look, and also to make myself clearly visible as just a truck, not something else. The kid was small, really small. I'd guess maybe 6, 7 years old. Hard to tell in the glare. They were just standing there, on the very edge of the gravel shoulder, right where the trees began. The woods pressed in close on this stretch of road. Tall, dark pines and dense undergrowth that looked like a solid black wall just beyond the reach of my lights. The kid wasn't looking at me. They were facing sort of parallel to the road, just walking, slowly, like they were on a stroll, completely oblivious to the massive 18-wheeler that had just pulled up beside them. Engine rumbling, lights blazing. They were wearing what looked like pajamas. Thin, light-colored pajamas. In the chill of the night. No coat, no shoes that I could see. My mind reeled. This was wrong. So many levels of wrong. I killed the engine. The sudden silence was almost deafening, amplifying the crickets. My heart was still thumping, a weird mix of fear and adrenaline, and a dawning sense of responsibility. I rolled down the window. The night air hit me, cold and damp, carrying the scent of pine and wet earth. "Hey," I called out. My voice sounded hoarse, too loud in the quiet. "Hey, kid." No response. They just kept walking, one small bare foot in front of the other, at a pace that was taking them absolutely nowhere fast. Their head was down, slightly. I couldn't see their face properly. "Kid, are you okay?" I tried again, louder this time. Slowly, so slowly, The kids stopped. They didn't turn their head fully, just sort of angled it a fraction, enough that I could see a pale sliver of cheek in the spill of my headlights. Still not looking at me. Still ignoring the multi-ton machine idling beside them. A prickle of unease ran down my spine. Not the normal kind of unease. This was deeper, colder. Animals act weird sometimes, but kids? A lost kid should be scared, relieved, something. This one was nothing. "What are you doing out here all alone?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm, friendly, like you're supposed to with a scared kid. Even though this one didn't seem scared at all. It's the middle of the night. Silence. Just the sound of their bare feet scuffing softly on the gravel as they took another step. Then another. As if my presence was a minor inconvenience, a background noise they were choosing to ignore. This wasn't right. My internal alarm bells were clanging louder now. My hand hovered near the gear stick. Part of me wanted to slam it into drive and get the hell out of there. But the image of this tiny child, alone, possibly in shock, I couldn't just leave. Could I? "Where are your parents?" I pushed, my voice a bit sharper than I intended. "Are you lost?" Finally, the kids stopped walking completely. They turned their head just a little more, still not looking directly at my cab, more towards the front of my truck, into the glare of the headlights. I could see their face a bit better now. Pale, featureless in the harsh light, like a porcelain doll. Small, dark smudges that might have been eyes. No expression. None. Not fear, not sadness, not relief. Just blank. An unreadable slate. Then a voice. Small, thin, like the rustle of dry leaves. Lost. Just that one word. It hung in the air between us. Relief washed over me, quickly followed by a fresh wave of concern. Okay, lost. That's something I can deal with. Okay, kid. Lost is okay. We can fix lost. Where do you live? Where were you going? The kid finally, slowly, turned their head fully towards my cab, towards me. I still couldn't make out much detail in their face. The angle, the light, something was obscuring it, keeping it in a sort of shadowy vagueness, despite the headlights. But I could feel their gaze. It wasn't like a normal kid's look. There was a weight to it, an intensity that was deeply unsettling for such a small form. "Home," the kid said. That same thin, reedy voice. Trying to get home. Right, home. "Where is home?" I asked, leaning forward a bit, trying to project reassurance. "Is it near here? Did you wander off from a campsite? A car?" There were no campsites for miles. No broken down cars on the shoulder. I knew that. The kid didn't answer that question directly. Instead, they took a small step towards the truck, then another. My hand tensed on the door handle, ready to open it, to offer what? A ride? Shelter? I didn't know. "It's cold out here," I said, stating the obvious. "You should get in. We can get you warm, and I can call for help when we get to a spot with a signal." My CB was useless, just static, My phone had shown no service for the last hour. The kid stopped about 5 feet from my passenger door, still in that pale, thin, pajama-like outfit, barefoot on the sharp gravel. They should be shivering, crying. They were doing neither. "Can you help me?" the kid asked. The voice was still small, but there was a different inflection to it now. Less flat. A hint of something else. Pleading, maybe. "Yeah, of course I can help you," I said. "That's why I stopped. Where are your parents? How did you get here?" The kid tilted their head, a jerky, unnatural little movement. "They're waiting. At home." "Okay. And where's home? Which direction?" I gestured vaguely up and down the empty highway. The kid didn't point down the road. They made a small, subtle gesture with their head. A little nod towards the trees, towards the impenetrable darkness of the woods lining the highway. "In there," the kid said. My stomach clenched. "In the woods? Your home is in the woods?" "Lost," the kid repeated, as if that explained everything. "Trying to find the path. It's dark." "Yeah, it's very dark," I agreed, my eyes scanning the tree line. It looked like a solid wall of black, no sign of any path, any habitation, just dense old-growth forest. The kind of place you could get lost in for days, even in daylight. "Can you come out?" the kid asked. "Help me look. It's not far. I can't see it from here." Every rational thought in my head screamed no. Get out of the truck, in the middle of nowhere, in the pitch dark, with this strange child who wanted me to go into those woods? No, absolutely not. But the kid looked so small, so vulnerable. If there was even a tiny chance they were telling the truth, that their house was just a little way in, and they were genuinely lost. I don't think that's a good idea, buddy," I said, trying to sound gentle. "It's dangerous in there at night, for both of us. Best thing is for you to hop in here with me. We'll drive until we get a signal, and then we'll call the police or the rangers. They can help find your home properly." The kid just stood there, that blank, unreadable face fixed on me. "But it's right there," they insisted, their voice a little more insistent now. "Just a little way. I can almost see it. If you just step out, the light from your door would help." My skin was crawling. There was something profoundly wrong with this scenario. The way they were trying to coax me out. The lack of normal emotional response. The pajamas, the bare feet, the woods. I looked closer at the kid, trying to pierce that strange vagueness around their features. My headlights were bright, but it was like they absorbed the light rather than reflected it. Their eyes, I still couldn't really see their eyes, just dark hollows. "I really think you should get in the truck," I said, my voice firmer now. "It's warmer in here. We can figure it out together." The kid took another step closer. They were almost at my running board now. "Please," they said. I squinted, trying to see past the kid, towards the tree line they'd indicated. Was there a faint trail I was missing? A flicker of light deep in the woods? No, nothing. Just blackness. Solid, unyielding blackness. And then I saw it. It wasn't something I saw clearly at first. It was more like an anomaly, a disturbance in the darkness behind the kid. The kid was standing with their back mostly to the woods, facing my truck. Behind them, the darkness of the forest was absolute, or it should have been. But there was something connected to them. Something that stretched from the small of their back, from under the thin pajama top, and disappeared into the deeper shadows of the trees. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, a weird shadow cast by my headlights, hitting them at an odd angle. Maybe a rope they were dragging, a piece of clothing snagged on a branch. I leaned forward, trying to get a clearer view. The kid was still talking, their voice a low, persistent murmur. "It's not far. Please, just help me. I'm so cold." But I wasn't really listening to the words anymore. I was focused on that thing behind them. It wasn't a rope. It wasn't a shadow. It was a tube. A long, dark, thick tube. It seemed to emerge directly from the kid's lower back, impossibly, seamlessly. It was dark matte, like a strip of the night itself given form, and it snaked away from the child, maybe 10-15 feet, before disappearing into the inky blackness between two thick pine trunks. It wasn't rigid. It seemed to have a slight, almost imperceptible flexibility, like a massive, sluggish umbilical cord made of shadow. It didn't reflect any light from my headlamps. It just absorbed it. My breath hitched in my throat. My blood, which had been cold before, now felt like it had frozen solid. This wasn't just wrong. This was impossible. The kid was still trying to coax me. "Are you going to help me? It's just there. You're so close." My voice, when I finally found it, was barely a whisper. I couldn't take my eyes off that appendage. "Kid, what is that? Behind you." The kid flinched. Not a big movement, just a tiny, almost imperceptible tightening of their small frame. Their head, which had been tilted pleadingly, straightened. The blankness on their face seemed to solidify. "What's what?" they asked, their voice suddenly devoid of that pleading tone. It was flat again, colder. "That thing," I stammered, pointing with a shaking finger. "Coming out of your back, going into the woods. What is that?" The kid didn't turn to look. They didn't need to. Their gaze, those dark, unseen eyes, bored into me. "It's nothing," they said. The voice was still small, but it had a new edge to it, a hardness. "You're seeing things. You're tired." They were using my own earlier rationalization against me. "No," I said, my voice gaining a tremor of conviction born of sheer terror. "No, I'm not. I see it. It's right there. It's connected to you." The kid was silent for a long moment. The only sound was the thumping of my own heart, so loud I was sure they could hear it. The crickets had stopped. The wind seemed to die down. An unnatural stillness fell over the scene. Then, the kid's face began to change. It wasn't a dramatic movie monster transformation. It was far more subtle and far more terrifying. The blankness didn't leave, but it sharpened. The pale skin seemed to tighten over the bones. The areas where the eyes were, those dark smudges, seemed to deepen, to become more shadowed, more intense. And a flicker of something ancient and utterly alien passed across their features. It wasn't human anger. It was something older, colder, and infinitely more patient, now strained to its limit. The air in my cab suddenly felt thick, heavy, hard to breathe. "Just come out of the truck," the kid said. And the voice, oh God, the voice. It wasn't the small, reedy voice of a child anymore. It was deeper, resonant, with a strange, grating undertone, like stones grinding together. It was coming from that small frame, but it was impossibly large, impossibly old. It vibrated in my chest. "Come out! Now!" The command was absolute. My hand, which had been hovering near the gear stick, now gripped it like a lifeline. My other hand fumbled for the ignition key, which I'd stupidly left in. "What are you?" I choked out, staring at the monstrous thing playing dress-up in a child's form, at the dark, pulsating tube that was its anchor to the shadows. The kid's head tilted again, that jerky, unnatural movement. The expression on its face, if you could call it that, was one of pure, unadulterated annoyance. Contempt, like I was a particularly stupid insect it had failed to swat. And then it spoke, in that same terrible, resonant, grinding voice. The words it said are burned into my memory, colder than any winter night. "Why?" it rasped, the sound seeming to scrape the inside of my skull. "The fuck are humans smarter now?" That was it. That one sentence. The sheer cosmic frustration in it. The implication of past encounters, of easier prey. The utter alien nature of it. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I reacted. Primal fear, the kind that bypasses all higher brain function, took over. My hand twisted the key. The diesel engine roared back to life. A sudden, violent explosion of sound in the horrifying stillness. The kid, the thing, actually recoiled. A small, jerky step back. The expression, that awful, tightened, ancient look, intensified. I slammed the gear stick into drive. My foot stomped on the accelerator. The truck lurched forward, tires spinning on the gravel for a terrifying second before they bit into the asphalt. I didn't look at it. I couldn't. I stared straight ahead, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, the whole cab vibrating around me. The truck surged forward, gaining speed with agonizing slowness. For a horrible moment, I imagined that tube thing whipping out, trying to snag the trailer, to pull me back, to drag me into those woods. I imagined that small figure, with its ancient, terrible voice, somehow keeping pace. I risked a glance in my driver's side mirror. It was standing there, on the shoulder, unmoving. The headlights of my departing truck cast its small silhouette into sharp relief. And behind it, the dark tube was still visible, a thick, obscene cord snaking back into the endless night of the forest. It didn't seem to be retracting or moving. It just was. The thing didn't pursue. It just stood and watched me go. And that, somehow, was almost worse. The sheer confidence, the patience. Like it knew there would be others, or maybe it was just annoyed that this particular attempt had failed. I drove. I don't know for how long. I just drove. My foot was welded to the floor. The engine screamed. I watched the speedometer needle climb, far past any legal or safe limit for a rig that size, on a road that dark. I didn't care. The image of that thing, that child shape, with its dark umbilical to the woods, and that voice, that awful grinding voice asking its horrifying question, was burned onto the inside of my eyelids. I must have driven for an hour, maybe more, at speeds that should have gotten me killed or arrested, before the adrenaline started to fade, replaced by a bone-deep, shaking exhaustion that was more profound than any fatigue I'd ever known. My hands were trembling so violently, I could barely keep the wheel straight. Tears were streaming down my face, not from sadness, but from sheer, unadulterated terror and relief. When the first hint of dawn started to gray the eastern sky, and my phone finally beeped, indicating a single bar of service, I pulled over at the first wide spot I could find. I practically fell out of the cab, vomiting onto the gravel until there was nothing left but dry heaves. I sat there on the cold ground, shaking for a long time, watching the sun come up, trying to convince myself that it had been a dream, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion. But I knew it wasn't. The detail of that tube, the voice, the question. You don't hallucinate something that specific, that coherent, that utterly alien. I never reported it. Who would I report it to? What would I say? Officer, I saw a little kid who was actually an ancient cosmic horror tethered to the woods by a nightmare umbilical cord, and it got mad because I didn't want to be its dinner? They'd have locked me up, breathalyzed me, drug tested me, sent me for a psych eval. I finished that run on autopilot, dropped the load, drove my rig back to the yard, and I quit. I told them I was burned out, needed a break. They tried to convince me to stay, offered me different routes, more pay. I just couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that kid, that tube, those woods. Every dark road felt like a trap. I found a local job, something that keeps me home at night. I don't drive in remote areas anymore if I can help it, especially not at night. I still have nightmares. Sometimes, when I'm very tired, driving home late from somewhere, I'll see a flicker at the edge of my vision on the side of the road, and my heart will try to beat its way out of my chest. I don't know what that thing was. An alien? A demon? Something else. Something that doesn't fit into our neat little categories? All I know is that it's out there, and it's patient, and it seems to have learned that its old tricks aren't as effective as they used to be. Why the fuck are humans smarter now? That question haunts me. It implies they weren't always. It implies that, once upon a time, we were easier. That maybe, just maybe, people like me, tired and alone on dark roads, used to just step out of the cab when asked, and were never seen again. So if you're ever driving one of those long, lonely stretches of road, deep in the night, and you see something you can't explain, maybe just keep driving. Maybe being smarter now means knowing when not to stop, knowing when to ignore that little voice telling you to help, because what's asking for help might not be what it seems. Stay safe out there, and for God's sake, stay on the well-lit roads, ... Good evening. If you found your way here tonight, maybe your day's been long. Maybe your mind is still racing a little. Or maybe you just need a voice in the quiet. So, breathe. Let the world slow down, just for a while. Tonight, I'll take you deep into a forest where time doesn't move the way it should. Where someone who wanted to disappear found something that had been waiting. This isn't a story to scare you. Not really. It's a soft tale of silence, of memory, of the kind of hunger that lives under roots and breathes with the trees. So, curl up. Let your eyes grow heavy. And if the woods call to you in your dreams tonight, just remember, not everything that's quiet is safe. Dear friend, if you're lying quietly in your room, listening to the soft sound of rain, or just searching for a gentle story to soothe your restless thoughts before sleep, then let me tell you something strange. Something even I once found hard to believe. It all began on a late night, around 3 a.m., that hour when every street is silent. Every light has gone out. I had just left a friend's house. A short get-together, a few drinks, and conversations that stretched deep into the night. I should have stayed, but you know how it is. It's just a 20-minute drive. Sometimes that's the last thought you remember before everything changes. On the way home, I don't recall exactly what happened. There was no crash sound, no blinding flash, no dramatic moment like you see in movies. Just stillness and cold. Everything turned off. No sound, no weight, no body. I was still, aware, but I knew I was no longer alive. And in that space, where time had no shape, I met him, not the kind of him you've ever read about in holy books. And from that moment on, I was no longer afraid of dying. I was only afraid of what comes after death. I think what makes death so terrifying for many isn't that it's the end, but that we never know when it actually begins. One moment, you're thinking, planning, mapping out your tomorrow, and the next, there's nothing. Not pain, not screaming, not fear, just emptiness. I used to imagine what dying would feel like. Maybe you have too. Some people say you'll see your whole life flash before your eyes. Some say there's a tunnel of light, warm, welcoming, where hands reach out to guide your soul. But for me, there was no light, no warmth, no tunnel, just black. I remember I was still driving, the same road I'd taken home 1,000 times. No traffic, no city lights, just the soft beam of headlights cutting through a quiet, damp night. I remember yawning, and then something stretched. It felt like the world itself slowed down. My eyes were open, but everything ahead blurred. Even sound faded. And then, nothing. I didn't see the impact. I didn't see the truck coming. I didn't feel the crash or my body being thrown. I didn't hear glass shatter. Didn't feel pain. No scream. No blood. Just darkness. A formless, endless darkness. You might think I was asleep, but it wasn't like sleep, not even close. There were no dreams. There was no mind left to even create a dream. It was more like I had never been born. A space where I didn't exist, and yet, somehow, I knew that I didn't. I tried to open my eyes, but realized I had no eyes. I tried to move, but I had no limbs, no hands, no feet. There was no body, no weight, no shape. Just awareness. Just the faint, drifting presence of me. I wanted to call out, but there was no voice. I wanted to pray, and in that strange moment, maybe seconds, maybe eternity, I just floated. I didn't know where I was, didn't know what was happening. There were no angels, no God, no judgment, no one calling my name. I used to believe that when we die, we'd see our loved ones again. But I didn't see anyone. I didn't feel warmth. I didn't feel safe. All I felt was awareness, and a quiet question echoing through the void. So, is this death? It wasn't like anything I'd prepared for. No cinematic moment. No divine embrace. Just stillness. Cold. Abstract. It felt like being removed from the world. Not gently, but without notice. I thought I'd panic. Thought I'd scream, beg, cry. But how can you panic when you don't even know if you exist? You can't be afraid if there's nowhere left to be. You can't be lost if there's no direction. You're just there. Like a thought torn from a mind, suspended in nothingness. I didn't know what happened next. I didn't know if anyone. I didn't know if I was being saved, or if I'd already gone too far. All I knew was that everything I had been, the emotions, the memories, the name, the fears, the love, was dissolving like smoke, leaving only the rawest version of me, a bare fragment of awareness, drifting through infinity. I don't know how long I was there. Maybe minutes, maybe millennia. But then, something shifted. A tremble, so small, like the air itself had just noticed me. And from that nameless nothing, from it appeared. I don't know how long I was suspended in that darkness. A minute? A year? Another lifetime? In that place, time didn't exist. There was no light, no sound. The only thing left was me. And even that isn't quite true. It wasn't me as I had known myself. Just some vague fragment left behind after everything else had been stripped away. There was no shape, no voice, no eyelids to open or close. I didn't exist in any way we normally understand. Somehow, impossibly, I knew I was there. Strangely, I began to wake up. Not with a gasp or jolt like waking from a bad dream. It was slower, more like mist, gradually lifting, as if consciousness was unfolding layer by layer in silence. I couldn't see, but I knew there was nothing around me. No walls, no ceiling, no sky, no ground. Just a strange gray that wasn't quite gray. Not white, not black, just something undefined. I wasn't in a space, really, more like I had drifted into a concept. And then I realized this place had no life. There were no sounds because there were no things to make sound. No sense, no textures, no feeling of warmth or cold. And what frightened me most was realizing that I couldn't feel my heart beating. Not once, not ever again. No breath, no hunger, no thirst, no need to sleep, no need to use the bathroom. All the normal signs of having a living body were simply gone. I tried. Did I have parents? A partner? Where was I from? Where was I now? But my memories were like a torn map, scattered pieces floating around me, just out of reach. I knew I had once been a person. There had been a car, a late night, alcohol, a crash, and then that great, endless silence. I had no idea why I was still aware. If I had died, shouldn't I have stopped feeling, stopped thinking, just ceased? But I hadn't. I was still here, but no one else was. This wasn't heaven. No clouds, no harps, no celestial music. It wasn't hell. No flames, no suffering, no demons. Just a place with no name. Like a waiting room between dream and death. Hovering somewhere outside time. Just waiting. Or never waiting at all. I couldn't move, but not because I was bound or restrained. I had no body to move. I was just a single point of awareness, a drifting echo of consciousness. It had no eyes, no face, but I knew I wasn't alone anymore. Something else had entered the space. It didn't touch me. It didn't speak. It didn't move. It just observed. And strangely, I wasn't afraid. I thought I'd be afraid. This was an unknown place, far from anything I understood. But instead of fear, all I felt was stillness. Stillness so absolute, it cracked me open. And out spilled the questions. Am I really dead? If this is the afterlife, why am I still thinking? What's watching me? Is it God? Something beyond God? Where am I in the universe? Or have I left it altogether? I had no answers. No one answered. But the feeling of being observed, even without eyes, grew stronger. Not like being stalked, not like prey, but more like I was being studied. As if I were a strange life form trapped in a glass jar, and something vast and intelligent was examining me. Then, in the midst of that total silence, a message echoed, not with word, but like a thought, pressed directly into the core of my being. A message so simple, it didn't need interpretation. At last, you've arrived. I didn't know who you was. I didn't know who was speaking, or if it came from outside, or from somewhere deep within me. But from that moment forward, I understood one thing with absolute clarity. I was no longer alive, and wherever I was now was far beyond anything humanity could name. I used to believe that if I ever met God, it would be in some magnificent light. Perhaps a figure with a flowing white beard, kind eyes, and a gentle smile, just like the paintings. But here, in a place with no light, no sound, no time, what I met had no face, no eyes, no form, no gender, not a man, not a demon, not a thing at all. It was awareness, something that knew I was here and let me know it was here too. There were no footsteps, no sudden appearance, no scene to witness. But somewhere, from deep within myself, a presence began to rise. Like invisible water, slowly flooding my consciousness, soaking into every part of what I still was. It didn't approach. It didn't need to. It was everywhere, and somehow inside me at the same time. At first, I thought it was a hallucination, maybe just a final burst from a dying brain, creating comforting illusions in its last flicker. But no, this did not comfort me. It simply existed, as if it had always been there, long before I arrived. And then without sound or language, an impression pressed itself into me. I am. That was all. 2 words, no context, no explanation, and yet I understood. I am. Not I am something, but just am. A statement so complete, it required no further definition. It felt ancient, vast, absolute. I wanted to ask so many things. Who are, and I didn't need to, because it already knew everything I wanted to ask, before I even formed the thought. And again, a stream of awareness flowed into me. You are asking with the language of the living. But here, language no longer exists. Only truth remains. I fell silent. Or maybe I simply stopped trying to make words where none could form. All I could do now was feel and be felt in return. I tried to imagine what it looked like, but I couldn't. There was no shape I could attach to it. No light, no darkness, no large or small, no old, no young, just a limitless awareness surrounding and filling the silent space I existed in. And when I tried to give it a name, It responded simply, "You may call me God." I nearly wept, if I still had tears. Not from joy, not from reverence, but from a deep, sharp confusion. Because what I was experiencing did not resemble love, or holiness, or humanity. It did not embrace me, did not comfort me, did not judge me. It felt nothing in the way I understood emotion. It wasn't angry. It wasn't joyful. It wasn't proud. It simply observed. Like a scientist might observe a cell beneath glass. Not with hatred, not with love, but with curiosity. And that, more than anything, unsettled me. I had imagined that meeting God would mean a review of my life, that I'd be asked about my mistakes and my triumphs, that I'd be led somewhere, heaven, perhaps, or hell. But here, there were no questions, no crimes, no rewards, just me, an awareness, staring into something infinitely larger. I whispered in my mind, "Did you create me?" The reply was cool and precise. "I created all things, but not in the way you understand. I do not write scripts. I scatter seeds." Seeds? I thought. Like a gardener? No, like one who casts sand into the wind to see where it falls. That answer froze something inside me. It wasn't malicious. It wasn't warm. It was simply true. No destiny. No loving will. Just observation. And I realized something else. This God, this presence I was now in, did not exist to be understood. Its purpose wasn't to be known, but rather to confront us with what remains when nothing else can hide us from ourselves. I asked, in one last effort of clarity, "So, where do I go now? Do I return? Do I have a choice?" There was no verbal reply. Instead, a soft opening. Not a door, not a tunnel, but a direction. A sensation of something flowing outward. Not blinding, not sharp, but definitive. An invitation, or a path. I didn't know what it meant, only that it was different than this place. Something like returning, something like beginning again. And I knew I could step into it or dissolve into this stillness forever. By then, I could no longer hold on to the calm I had at the beginning. That unsettling stillness, I was no longer hovering in balance between curiosity and dread. I was breaking, not physically. I had no body, but something inside me was beginning to fracture. I stopped simply listening. I began to ask, am I really dead? Does my family know? Are they crying right now? Will I ever see them again? Why me? What did I do wrong? There was no voice, but answers still came. Not with warmth, not with mercy, but with pure data, clean, cold, precise, like a machine interpreting input. You are dead by the biological definition of your species. I braced myself, not to hold back tears. I had no eyes, no tear ducts, but to preserve some remnant of what felt human in me. But I'm still thinking, I remember who I am. I feel. I remember my name, my mother. I still remember my mother. Memory does not confirm life. Memory is residue. So what am I? A copy, a shadow. You are the remainder, where trying to shape those words into something digestible, but I couldn't. Each answer it gave was like a silent blade, severing every illusion I had used to protect myself. Will I see them again? My father? My brother? The woman I love? Are they here? Somewhere else? Each consciousness follows its own thread. There is no merging, no reunion as you imagine it. That answer froze me in place. So everything was temporary. Love, family, friendship. Why did we love? If it all ends alone. Emotion is a biological function. Love is a survival mechanism, not destiny. I felt like I was floating in a nightmare. Not because the truth was horrific, but because it was too logical. Cold, clean, undeniable. So you created everything, just to observe? There's no purpose, no goodness, no redemption. I do not require purpose. Things exist because they can. I am not good. I am not evil. I simply am. I wanted to recoil if I still had a sense of space. I wanted to curl up like a child, but I had no body, no limbs to hold on to myself. Only a raw, naked mind being stripped down to nothing. We suffer, we pray, sacrifice, endure. Is no one listening? I do not intervene. I do not promise. I do not answer. Suffering is reaction, not a test, not a punishment, only consequence. I wanted to scream, but there was no scream left, no mouth, no voice. I wanted to deny all of it, but there was no belief strong enough to override what I was now facing. This wasn't the death I expected. This was truth, not waiting for my permission to exist. I don't know how long I stayed silent. I don't know how much of me was left by then. But at some point, I stopped asking. Not because I had no more questions, but because I couldn't bear any more answers. Then something strange happened. I no longer felt it. This presence that had been responding. I no longer felt its thoughts, and for the first time since awakening after death, I was alone, weightless, still, as if the entire weight of the cosmos had finally stepped back. In that moment, I thought, or maybe I simply felt, a quiet realization. If everything I believed was wrong, then what do I have left to hold on to? And the only reply, not from anyone, was silence. I had been silent for a long time, not because I no longer had questions, but because I had realized something. Asking wouldn't change anything. Everything I had believed, everything I had hoped for, was no longer relevant in this place. This was not heaven, not hell, not a realm of comfort, not a place of punishment. This was a vast experiment. And God, the presence here, was not the kind creator we imagined. It didn't need worship. It didn't love us, but it didn't hate us either. It did not intervene. It did not fix. It did not guide. It did not promise. It simply observed. After what felt like an eternity of quiet, I felt the presence return. No pressure, no sound, no light, just a sensation, like a wind brushing against consciousness. I didn't ask anything, but it spoke again, in the way it always had. You have been still long enough to begin seeing. I wasn't sure what it meant, but something inside me began to shift. Not in it, but in how I saw it. I began to sense it as an ancient intelligence, beyond all morality, compassion, or even existence as we know it. Not human, not emotional, a pure awareness, functioning in dimensions beyond ours. And then it said, I do not reward, I do not punish, I do not save, I do not guide, I simply record. A cold ripple passed through me. Not fear, but clarity. I could no longer expect anything from it. Not forgiveness, not miracles, not meaning. I remembered the times I had prayed during life, during grief. Betrayal, despair. I had whispered to the sky, to something greater, hoping someone was listening. And now I knew someone was. But they never answered. Or rather, they heard, but did not reply. So I asked, gently this time, not with anger, why don't you intervene? You could save people, stop wars, end suffering. Why not? And it answered, if I intervene, I disrupt the potential for learning. That stopped me. You need to learn? Aren't you all-knowing? Omniscience is not having every answer. It is being able to receive them as they emerge. It didn't use words, but the meaning entered me like waves lapping at sand. God wasn't a being that already knew everything. God was something that waited to see what would unfold and then observed. A scientist of the cosmos, an eternal consciousness running experiments, but never tampering with the test. We humans were only one of countless, perhaps infinite forms it had watched. No sacred mission, no grand plan. There was only one truth that remained, the capacity of consciousness to evolve. I thought of all the people who had devoted their lives to faith, to the hope of salvation. And I realized perhaps it wasn't truth that kept us alive. It was belief. Belief itself may have been part of the experiment, a reaction, a tool for adaptation, a way for humanity to cope with the unknowable. So what are we to you? I asked at last. And it replied, you are a spark in a forest of darkness. I do not come to extinguish it. I do not come to fan it. I come to observe how it burns. I fell silent again. There was no more pain, no more resistance, just a feeling of release. I no longer demanded answers. I didn't need to know why I was here. I didn't need to understand what comes next. I simply knew I had met it, and that it was nothing like we thought. I once believed that humanity was the center of the universe, the peak of evolution, the reason everything existed, a species specially loved by God. But here, in this nameless, soundless space, where there were no promises, no heaven or hell, only stillness, I began to see a truth no one had prepared me for. We are not the main characters. I tried to believe we were special, that our love, our creativity, our pain, our hope must hold meaning to someone. That if there was a divine being observing us, surely they would be moved when we held each other, when we sacrificed, when we saved one another in moments of danger. But what I stood before now did not smile, did not cry, did not say, "Well done." It simply watched and recorded. Not unlike a biologist watching microbes under a microscope. Not cruel, but not caring either. A stream of awareness moved through me again. No question this time. Only a comparison. You are like bacteria, fast to adapt, aggressive in survival, always replicating. If I still had a heart, I think it would have broken. Bacteria, not souls, not sacred beings, just a life form worth observing. I whispered barely, "So, is there nothing sacred about us? Nothing worth revering? The sacred is your construct. I do not label emotions. I record behavior." That answer hit me harder than any pain I had known. Not because it was harsh, but because it stripped me of everything tender I thought I had. I thought of all the mothers holding children in war, fathers going hungry so their kids could eat, strangers laying down their lives for someone they'd never met. I had believed, if there were angels, if there was God, surely they bowed before such acts. But no, no bowing, no reward, no acknowledgement, only data logged. A chill crept through every memory I'd ever clung to. I began to wonder, why do we try so hard? Why do we suffer, love, endure, if it earns us nothing? And the answer, though unspoken, was clear. But to be watched. Like a chemical reaction. Like an experiment running across centuries. I asked the question I had never dared ask in life. So, are we just an experiment? The silence stretched long. Not because it didn't have an answer, but because I already knew it. And then the thought came. All sentient life is data. You are no more special than ants, no less than chimps. You are a complex sequence, worthy of observation, but not of direction. If I had tears, I might have wept, not because I was insulted, but because, for the first time, I felt completely stripped of every illusion. No divine favor, no leading role, no noble arc. We were just a variable. Then it added, a message not cruel, but strangely revealing. You are the only species on Earth capable of realizing you are not special, and continuing anyway. That is what makes you interesting. I stayed quiet for a long time, Not sad, not angry, just released. Like a child growing up and learning the world doesn't revolve around them. There's disappointment at first, then a cold sort of maturity. I no longer asked the universe to be fair, because now I understood it never promised to be. I once believed in God, not always devoutly, but in my weakest moments, I prayed. Like millions of others, I looked to the sky and whispered, hoping someone was listening. I used to think religion was the bridge between us and the divine, proof that there was a plan, evidence that we weren't alone in the vast universe. But here, in this nameless void, under the cold gaze of something older than thought, I began to see a truth that froze every part of me. Religion wasn't sent down. It was imagined, created by humans to cope with meaninglessness. I don't remember when I first believed. Maybe as a child, watching my mother kneel in front of a family altar, hands pressed together, whispering words I didn't understand. As I grew, I learned about other faiths. Buddhism spoke of compassion. Christianity taught love and forgiveness. Islam emphasized surrender and discipline. Despite their differences, they all promised one thing, meaning that every pain had a reason, that every good deed would be rewarded, that death was not the end, that someone, somewhere, saw our struggle and cared. But here, in front of this, I realized with a quiet horror, it did not care. I asked, though I already feared the answer. So, are all religions wrong? The reply drifted in, cold and light. Not right, not wrong. They are responses from minds afraid of the unknown. And then I saw, not with eyes, but with awareness. Visions, feelings, memories. A primitive man trembling under a thunderstorm, begging the sky for mercy. A mother cradling her starving child, whispering to a god to make a miracle. A warrior dying in battle, believing his sacrifice would bring him to paradise. They weren't foolish. They were terrified. I felt it clearly. Religion is the immune system of the mind, a self-protective mechanism against the unbearable realization that no one made promises to us. No one owes us answers. There is no divine oath, no cosmic plan. What I saw before me did not bless, did not condemn, did not write scriptures. It simply watched, recorded, like an entomologist studying how ants build their colony. I asked, softly, as if confessing, do we need belief? The answer came, not to comfort, but to remove illusion. You do not need it. You created it because you could not yet accept truth without answers. I fell into silence, and I understood. Faith, miracles, scriptures, they weren't revelations from above. They were tools of survival for sentient minds not yet ready to face the void. We wrote holy books to fill the gap. We invented heaven to ease our fear of dying. We imagined Judgment Day to believe that evil would one day be addressed. But here, before God, I understood. No one authored that story. We did. We printed it. We taught each other to believe. And when we die, we discover the story was never mailed. In that moment, I wasn't angry, not disappointed, not defiant. I just felt empty. And strangely, that emptiness felt light. I didn't need to find meaning anymore. Didn't have to cling to prophecy. Didn't need to live trying to please someone watching from above. I only had to live because I was alive. I used to believe that even if nothing else in life was certain, at least right and wrong were. At least good and evil had to be clear. That killing was wrong. Saving someone was right. Lying was bad. Truth was good. But standing before this presence, this God without emotion, without shape, without morality, I began to realize there is no absolute in the universe, not even good and evil. After a long silence, one that felt like centuries, I finally asked, then, how do you distinguish right from wrong? The answer came like a breeze across my awareness. I do not distinguish. Those are constructs of finite minds. They are not laws of the universe. I hesitated. Then, ethics, rules, the things we live by, they're just illusions? Not illusions. Tools to organize societies, to preserve identity, to prevent collapse. I understood. We invented good and evil. Not because the cosmos demanded it, but because we needed a way to survive each other. I remembered what I had learned in school. Laws were not born from pure morality. They came from mutual fear. Religions, in their earliest forms, weren't bridges to the divine. They were systems to control behavior. So I asked what perhaps millions before me had wondered. So, is killing wrong, or only wrong from our point of view? And the answer chilled me. Killing is an action, wrong or right. That is how a reference frame interprets it. Then to you, what are evil acts? War, torture, genocide. What do they mean? There was no anger in the reply, no sorrow, just clarity. They are reactions of a disrupted system. Not evil, not good, merely data to be analyzed. I froze. The human part of me wanted to fight back, to scream that some things are undeniably wrong. But I realized that voice was ego, the part of me still clinging to the belief that justice was universal, that good must prevail. But to this being, nothing is universal. Then it showed me, not with images, but with insight. Other worlds, other species, other planets where sentient life had once thrived, where civilizations had grown, developed ethics, believed in right and wrong, and were then gone. Not because they were wicked, not because they failed a test, but because they stopped producing new data. Did you destroy them? I asked. Not destroyed, discontinued. When a system no longer produces meaningful outcomes, it concludes. I felt like something inside me collapsed. Not because of violence, but because of the quiet indifference of it. We live as long as we remain interesting. We persist as long as we produce something new. And good or evil, they're not requirements. They are internal myths we tell ourselves to feel that we are on the right side of the story. I thought about all the stories we cherish: the brave hero, the just war, the villain punished. All of them just internal narratives. Tales we create, celebrate, and cling to. The universe does not participate. Have you ever praised a world? I asked, almost shyly. And the answer was, no, I do not evaluate. I observe until there is nothing left to observe. I was quiet for a long time, not in shock, but because I felt myself unraveling, not in sorrow, but in a strange awakening, like someone who's lived inside a fairy tale and finally steps outside into a world without magic. No angels, no promises, no eternal justice, only choices, people, and the stories we write for ourselves. I used to hate pain. Like everyone else, I tried to avoid it. We built entire civilizations just to minimize pain, physical, emotional, or psychological. We called that progress. Painkillers, therapists, religion, meditation, all of them, in some way, aim to do one thing: make us feel less. But here, in a place with no body, no nerves, no sound, I began to realize something that stunned me. It is pain that makes us human. I asked God, or whatever presence was with me, why must there be pain? Why do we suffer if you don't punish, reward, or judge? The answer came, sure and steady. Pain is an anchor. It's how consciousness clings to experience. Without pain, there is no learning. I didn't understand right away. But what about joy, love, satisfaction? Don't they teach us something too? Joy is a result. Pain is an imprint. Only pain leaves marks deep enough to shape memory. I thought about my childhood and realized it was true. I don't clearly remember the peaceful days, but I remember in detail. The first time I fell and bled. The first time I was slapped. The first betrayal. The first death I witnessed. Every sound, every look, every word, because it hurt. And then I understood. Pain is the brain's most effective memory mechanism. Not punishment, not cosmic discipline. Simply this: what hurts gets remembered. What is remembered changes us. What changes evolves. So, you don't care if we're happy? I asked, not with anger, just curiosity. I do not need you to be happy. I need you to learn. And only pain compels your mind to absorb change. I felt something like compassion rise in me, but not for God. For the part of me that spent a lifetime dodging discomfort, chasing meaning, running from grief, all while carrying the seeds of growth I refused to see. I once thought happiness was the goal of life, but now I saw Happiness is a brief reward, a resting place in a long journey built on pain. Not a destination, but a temporary shelter between storms of memory and insight. Do you ever feel pain? I asked, though I already sensed the answer. No, I do not feel. I record. Then do you understand it? I do not need to understand. I measure what it creates. And I realized this presence wasn't here to comfort, not to empathize, not to soothe. It was here to document. And in that documentation, pain was the most valuable metric. I looked back at the things I had once cursed: betrayals, days of emptiness, dreams that shattered, deaths I couldn't stop. I had thought, this is punishment. Now I saw this. I began to thank every scar in my memory, not because I thought them beautiful, but because I now understood. Without them, I would have nothing left to remember. After everything, there were no more questions, no more reactions, no more resistance. I had dissolved into what I used to call me. I had let go of justice, morality, destiny, reward, punishment, even love. I wasn't searching anymore. I was just here, in a place with no name, where tomorrow does not exist. And then it returned, not with footsteps, not with a voice, just a sensation, like an unseen gaze passing through my awareness. No explanations, no analysis, just a choice, given without words. You may stay or return. I knew what it meant. To stay was to remain in this dimension. No body, no time, no identity. Only pure awareness, continuing to absorb, to slowly fade into unspeakable truth. To return was to go back to the old world, with form, with limits, with pain, confusion, and forgetting, but also the taste of morning coffee, the sound of laughter, the warmth of an embrace. If I go back, will I remember this? I asked. Not clearly, but a trace will remain, a touch. Will it change me? Deeply. I hesitated. To stay was stillness. No more worry, no more wounds. A peace beyond emotion. To return was chaos, mistakes, loss, struggle, but also the only place where I might hug my mother again. The only place where, maybe on a quiet afternoon, I might hear the laughter of children playing in the street. I don't know why I chose what I did. Not for heroism, not for duty, not for destiny. Just a very small, very human feeling that I still had something left to do, even if I couldn't remember what. And then I felt myself pulled, not by force, but by intention. A current opened, gentle, unhurried, no color, no sound, just a path home. Before I crossed it, I heard one last thought, not spoken, but pulsing quietly inside me. When you return, you will not be who you were, but you will not remember why. Let the trace lead you. I began to fall, not fast, not frightened, but as if slipping gently back into something that once fit me. I saw light, not heavenly light, just the pale glow of a hospital ceiling and the faint smell of antiseptic. I heard voices, distant, muffled, but real. He's waking up. I had returned. I didn't remember clearly what had happened, only a feeling that I had once known something enormous and left it behind on the way back. But something in me wasn't the same. I no longer raged, no longer demanded fairness from life, no longer asked, why me? I just lived, softer, quieter, and with a strange knowing that something was watching. Not to save me, but to see what I would do with what remained of my time. I woke up in a hospital, dim ceiling lights, the beeping of machines, footsteps echoing softly on tiled floors, someone whispering beside my bed, the voice I recognized, though I couldn't name it. They said I had been in a coma for 3 days, a car accident. No one really believed I'd make it. I listened to their version of what happened. I nodded, but deep down, I knew something in me had changed. Not because I remembered something strange. The truth is, I didn't remember clearly at all. No vivid visions, no detailed dreams, just a strange blankness. And within that blankness, a lingering trace, like a fingerprint on glass. I couldn't see it, couldn't describe it, but it was there, whispering without words. I tried to tell a close friend, told him I'd been somewhere, that I'd met something unlike anything we've ever named, that I'd seen God, but not the God we talk about. He laughed gently and clapped my shoulder, probably just that. I dreamed of aliens during my appendix surgery, and I fell silent, not because I had nothing to say, but because I knew I couldn't say it any better. I returned to ordinary life. I ate, went to work, made small talk, but inside, I wasn't who I was before. I no longer got angry at trivial things, no longer argued about right and wrong, felt the need to prove anything to anyone. I lived as if every day was borrowed. Sometimes I'd watch people debating morals, politics, faith, and I would smile, not out of pride, but because I knew it was all perspective, a language invented by those who needed structure. But I had seen, we are all observers, not here to win, but to see how we respond to the experience of being. At times, I look up at the sky, and I feel as if something is still watching, not to judge, not to save, just to see. And I know it doesn't expect me to be perfect, only to choose something I can live with. And now, I sit, not to convince you. I know you don't have to believe. Maybe you'll even smile, like my old friend did. But I'm not telling this so you'll believe. I'm telling it so you might think again about the pain you felt, the moments you almost gave up, the things you call right and wrong. Whether you've truly lived or just reacted to what life threw at you. If you've ever asked, what happens after we die? I can't give you a clear answer, only a feeling that I've seen something enormous, and left it behind on the way back. And that feeling was enough to change me forever. Even if no one around me understands why, you can go on living as you always have, and maybe that's okay. But if one day you wake up in the middle of the night with the feeling that something in you has shifted, and you can't quite explain why, then maybe, just maybe, you were there too, and you brought back a trace, like I did. You've just forgotten, because humans must forget in order to go on living. But the trace, it stays, always.